Coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, President Trump speaking at the White House later this morning as he pushes for a deal with Iran.
We've been pushed around by Iran for 47 years, but not anymore.
The latest on the U.S. blockade and negotiations.
Plus, oil futures tumble and stocks rally on news of a potential deal. What's next as economic pressure in the Mideast mounts?
And Gary Gensler, the former chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, joins us in studio to talk allegations of insider trading and the challenges of policing prediction markets.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg Global Headquarters in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini, and look who's back.
I'm back, and very glad to be so. David Gura, along with Lisa Mateo, on this Saturday, April the 18th. Welcome to our listeners and viewers all across Bloomberg's many platforms, on radio, on TV, streaming on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Business app. We have some breaking news this morning. Iran saying restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz are back in place as the Americans and Iranians suggest another round of talks about ending the war are in the works.
That's right. We've already got a bit of saber rattling from the Iranian authorities this morning. We're going to get to that shortly. But first, President Trump says he'll answer questions from reporters later this morning in the 9 a.m. Eastern hour. But here's what he said aboard Air Force One, heading back to D.C. from Arizona.
It seems to be going very well in the Middle East with Iran. We'll know over a little period of time. We're negotiating over the weekend. And as you know, we have the blockade. The blockade's been very successful.
You told me earlier that everything has been agreed to. Iran was saying something different. So what has been worked out in that time?
They say something different because, you know, they have people that they have to cater to also. I really don't. I'm just doing the thing that's right. I'm just saying it like it is. And we have a situation, I think, that is going to be very beneficial. And the main thing is that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and that supersedes everything else.
You said that the U.S. was going to take the nuclear dust from Iran.
Yeah, we didn't
What's
make
the
a deal.
time? What's the timeline on that? How long will that take?
You want me to give you the time and date and everything else?
Is it like you've been negotiated how long that process will go on?
I'm not going to give you the time other than if we sign the agreement, then I can give you time somewhere after the signing of the agreement.
And
we'll go in with Iran. We'll go in with Iran and we will take it together and we will bring it back, 100% of it, back to the United States. If we don't do that, we will get it in a different form, in a much more unfriendly form.
And that unfriendly
but in
form,
any
would that
event,
involve
excuse me, but in any event, we'll get it. Go ahead.
If you don't have a deal by Wednesday when the ceasefire ends, will you extend the ceasefire or will you start attacks again?
Maybe I won't extend it.
Okay.
But the blockade is going to remain. But maybe I won't extend it. So you have a blockade. And unfortunately, we'll have to start dropping bombs again. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I think it's going to happen.
The president gathering with reporters on Air Force One last night. We have a headline crossing the Bloomberg right now. The Iranian deputy foreign minister saying there is no date set yet for the next round of Iran-U.S. talks. We're going to dig into all of this over the course of the next few hours. But let's get the headlines first with Lisa Mateo. Lisa?
Yeah, and let's get right to that. Is it an about-face? Iran's military says the Strait of Hormuz is shut down. Now, this comes less than a day after leaders in Tehran said that the waterway was open for commercial shipping after Israel agreed to a ceasefire in Lebanon. Several oil tankers, well, they already made a U-turn today after appearing to try and transit Hormuz. It's not clear why they changed course. There have been a few disagreements, though. President Donald Trump said he would work with Iran to recover the country's nuclear dust. Trump told Bloomberg in a phone interview yesterday that Iran has agreed to suspend nuclear program indefinitely. But Tehran pushing back, saying it did not agree to give up its enriched uranium. Returning to Washington from a Turning Point USA event in Phoenix late last night, President Trump said Iran and the U.S. will be negotiating over the weekend. But the president also told reporters aboard Air Force One about the possibility of resuming strikes on Iran once the current ceasefire expires next week. He added that the blockade would remain in place. Well, earlier at the Turning Point rally in Phoenix, the president said a deal with Iran not in any way tied to Lebanon. Now, the president said he will speak later this morning when he signs an executive order planned for the 9 a.m. hour local time. Well, stocks, they extended their rally on speculation the war would soon end. The S&P 500 had reached a fresh record, fueling its biggest monthly advance since 2020. It also posted a third straight week of gains exceeding 3%. Now, the dollar on Friday had briefly erased all of its war-fueled gains, and oil plunged to around $90 a barrel. Now, this all leads into a busy week of earnings that includes many defense stocks, but also companies like Tesla, Intel, and United Airlines. And in other news, a federal judge has blocked the merger of local television giants Nexstar and rival Tegna. That's until an antitrust lawsuit is resolved. 8 states and DirecTV, they're suing to block the $6.2 billion deal, saying it would hurt competition and lead to higher bills for consumers. Christina and David.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, there was never really a lot of clarity about whether the Strait was open or operating, which blockade was enforced, which blockade was not. So we want to take you to a live look at ship traffic through the Strait, as Iran's military commander says it has, quote, reimposed restrictions after the president said yesterday that they were lifted.
For our listeners on radio, a lot of red there on that map, still those ships kind of in static mode, waiting to see if the Strait is in fact open amidst all of the confusion that we've been talking about here over the last few minutes. Joining us now from Islamabad, ahead of potential negotiations, is the AP's international correspondent Philip Crowther. Bloomberg's Jerusalem reporter Dan Williams is with us as well, and Bloomberg's White House correspondent Jeff Mason. Phil, let me start with you. You're playing the waiting game. You were there last week as Vice President J.D. Vance made his way there to Pakistan for those talks and left without anything concrete. What are the indications that you're getting that there could perhaps be another round of talks there in Pakistan, if any at all?
Well, look, the very simple indications are that preparations clearly are underway here. The streets are being beautified, as they say. Some events have been called off here in Islamabad, and there has just been a lot of speculation over the last week whether a second round of talks might be possible. Certainly the authorities here, and that includes the political authorities, are very much preparing for a second round of talks. The speculation, of course, is when exactly this might happen, when delegations might arrive. We have no confirmation whatsoever on that. Now, as you can see, it appears to be a serious problem with the Strait of Hormuz being blocked again by Iran. That gives you an indication that on the ground, things can't be going toward a second round of negotiations. But at the same time, these are two sides that can get together and negotiate. The two things can be possible. There can be fresh hostilities, for example. There can be further tensions between the US and Iran, for example, in the Strait of Hormuz. And at the same time, the two negotiating teams are getting ready to travel here to the Pakistani capital of Islamabad for a second round of talks. It did look like everything was falling into place rather perfectly yesterday with the announcement from both the Iranian foreign minister and President Trump that the Strait of Hormuz would be fully reopened again. There was the 10-day ceasefire that was holding between Israel and Hezbollah. The simple fact that the ceasefire right now between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other also is, for the moment, is holding and could very well be extended further still. But then you have further doubts creep in. But at the end of the day, the reality here on the ground is certainly the government here, the authorities are excited about potentially hosting a second round of talks. The people here as well, and preparations certainly are underway.
Let's go to Jeff Mason. Jeff, are you excited about a potential round of talks? And who do you think, you heard Philip talk about Pakistan is getting ready. Who from the White House team is getting ready? Are we expecting the same players from last time to go? And at this point, what are the odds of these talks actually happening?
Well, a lot to unpack there. And number one, what are the odds? The odds seem high because that's the messaging that the White House has been giving. It's the messaging that President Trump has been giving, that he is ready to end this war and he's ready for an extension of peace and not just an extension, but something more permanent. That said, I think with the news this morning about the Strait of Hormuz and also the clips that you played from what President Trump said on Air Force One last night, it's important to underscore again the mixed messages that the president and the White House have been sending about this since day one of the war. And that is exemplified in the fact that many of the things that the president said have been agreed or are done simply are not, or have not at least been confirmed by Iran. And they being Tehran in this case, are showing that, are manifesting that in the Strait of Hormuz. Again, after yesterday, really goosing markets and exciting the rest of the world by saying that the Strait of Hormuz was open. Now it's not. Again, we'll see if President Trump comments on that today in the Oval Office. I think it casts, in general, to your question, Christina, a broad cloud of doubt over when and whether these talks will happen again, and whether they're nearly as far along in moving towards peace as the president has suggested.
As we have been from the very beginning of this conflict, we've been looking at two fronts, of course, the front in Iran and the front in Lebanon as well. And the president remarked on Lebanon yesterday at this Turning Point conference in Arizona. He did this swing through the American West and gave a couple of speeches. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about the role that Lebanon has played in this ceasefire negotiation.
Our deal with Iran is not in any way tied to Lebanon, but we will make Lebanon great again. I mean, it's about time we've sort of, the world has forgotten them, and they're good people who have lived like hell for a long period of time. And hopefully the situation with Hezbollah will get straightened out quickly.
Dan Williams, I won't ask you what it means to make Lebanon great again, but I'm curious if you could just talk a bit about the role that Lebanon played here in getting us to the position we were in yesterday when we had the Iranian foreign minister announcing this ceasefire deal on X yesterday morning.
It depends who you believe. You heard the U.S. president say just there that these were unrelated, these deals. It's no secret, however, that the Iranians very much wanted to see an end to Israeli attacks on Hezbollah, on Lebanon. Keep in mind that Hezbollah is Iran's biggest guerrilla ally, biggest proxy. Presumably the Iranians want to see Hezbollah preserved almost as much as they want to see their own regime preserved in Iran. So that was agreed. It was agreed apparently with some high-handedness by the US president, because there's a credible report here that on the night when it was agreed, as the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu was assembling a telephone vote by his security cabinet ministers, the news reported that Trump had already announced that the ceasefire was in place. Israel had agreed and it would begin at midnight. And there was some jostling and joking, I imagine mordant jokes among those ministers as to whether there was any point on them voting if it already had been announced widely, publicly, internationally. Add to that also that Trump, in that flurry of posts on Truth Social just a couple days ago, spoke very high-handedly about having effectively ordered Israel to cease fire in Lebanon. Enough is enough, he said. That optically isn't great for Israel's assertion of sovereignty in this war, of being an equal partner. It may also cost Netanyahu in the ballot box in a few months when Israel holds an election, given that many residents of northern Israel that have spent the last month in shelters, seeing their economy, their social fabric ruined by Hezbollah rockets, feel that they were shortchanged by this ceasefire, even though it's only a 10-day ceasefire, feel essentially that Hezbollah has been left standing and threatening them in the future.
Phil, I want to go back to you now. I'm going to read, there's something crossing the Associated Press right now with Dateline out of Cairo saying the British military is saying just a little while ago 2 gunboats from the IRGC opened fire on a tanker transiting the Strait of Hormuz after Iran said it had reimposed restrictions, as we reported this morning, in the area. The UK is saying the tanker and crew are reported safe. They have not identified the vessel or its destination. I want to ask you, because the last time we talked to you, or one of the many times we talked to you, you were at the Strait. I know you've done a lot of reporting around there. Were any of those 20,000 sailors or merchant marines able to get out in this intervening time where it was unclear if the Strait was operational? And even though we had that brief period of time where Iran said traffic was open, did anyone take the risk? It didn't seem like, we watch these maps all the time, that really anybody was willing to gamble with their personnel or their equipment. And is that going to be the status quo for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, really strange situation, this one, this short moment of freedom, if you will, freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, that some tankers did decide to at least try out. Satellite imagery does show, and the tracking data shows, that quite a lot of those ships, that includes tankers, of course, try to get out of the Persian Gulf, where they have been stuck for a very long time, some 6-7 weeks or more, but then turned around again. Maybe the moment where they noticed that the big announcement of an end of the Strait of Hormuz blockade, both by Iran and the United States, wasn't really what it sounded like, both from the president and from the Iranian foreign minister. We have no confirmation of any ships managing to make it through. But as you mentioned there, that is a first incident in the Strait of Hormuz with actual gunships from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards firing at a tanker. It's the first time we hear of that in a long time. I think it's going to be at least 3 or 4 weeks because there had been these threats and indeed attacks at the start of the US-Israeli war on Iran. Plenty of attacks on, I believe it was just under a dozen of ships that were attacked by Iranian gunships and other Iranian forces. And those threats remained throughout this war. And it was those threats that led to tankers and, of course, the shipping companies and the insurance companies whose rates were skyrocketing, who decided that it was just not going to be safe enough to attempt a passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Now we are back to exactly that, to an actual attack by the IRGC on a tanker, according to the UK military. Now, that is a serious escalation and a return to the situation we were in about 5 weeks ago. Just one attack like this one is going to put the fear in a lot of shipping companies, transport companies, in the sailors themselves to not attempt another passage through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
Jeff Mason, I'll turn to you lastly, and I'm curious sort of what the White House has been saying about the back and forth that's been happening not directly between Iranian officials and President Trump. The president has been indicating that Iran is prepared to give a host of concessions, including moving that nuclear dust, as it was put during that gaggle on Air Force One, letting the U.S. come in and, with Iran's cooperation, presumably move it out. No real confirmation of that from the Iranian side. How do they explain that level of disconnect? And do you see that as potentially just sort of laying the parameters for perhaps the second round of negotiations?
Well, there isn't an explanation for that disconnect, and I think that's largely the problem. Markets are listening to what President Trump says when he's giving a positive spin or putting a positive spin on the state of play, and that's pleasing everyone because it's clear that President Trump has moved in the direction of wanting to end this war. And I wrote a story about that yesterday. He's got domestic issues that he'd like to focus on. That's manifested in the trip that he made this week, talking more about the economy, talking about politics, talking a little bit less about Iran. But the reality is that the deal that he's talking about has not been hammered out. And a lot of the details that he's wanting to trumpet, including about nuclear dust, clearly have not been agreed to by Iran. So that is a large weakness hanging over, or at least a large question mark hanging over the prospect of peace that the White House has not offered an explanation for.
Thanks to all of you. That's Jeff Mason there, our White House correspondent, joining us from Washington, D.C. Philip Crowther in Pakistan, joining us again on this Saturday morning, and Dan Williams, our Jerusalem correspondent as well. And Christina, it just strikes me this morning, the level of confusion that we have here that began yesterday with that announcement from the foreign minister and really has continued over these last 36 hours as we try to piece together what in fact is open, what is the appetite for further talks, and what's the appetite, as you rightly pointed out, among captains of these ships to attempt to make their way through a very precarious waterway. And
it's so unclear. I'm talking, I'm not just texting while you're talking. I'm reaching out to some sources, including some folks we talked to in the Maritime Department of the UN, and they're saying to me they're working on getting us information about this incident, possibly another incident, but they don't know yet either because it's still coming in and it's hard to track exact numbers of who got through, who tried to go through. And to your point, whether or not they're even going to risk their crew or their company's, boats to get through this, especially in such uncertain times.
A huge unanswered question. Will that ceasefire be extended? It's something that Kate Sullivan, our colleague here at Bloomberg, asked the president about, indefinite about that as well. Coming up here, will the market rally continue even without a sure ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran? We're going to talk about that with our colleague Danny Berger and falling oil prices with our colleague Mike McGlone. Straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, and at Bloomberg.com.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on some of the top stories. Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller said he's cautious about the need to lower interest rates in the near term due to the energy shock triggered by the war in Iran.
Abstracting from the effects of tariffs and energy, I see a forecast in which underlying inflation continues to move toward 2%, leaving me cautious about rate cuts now, and are more inclined to cuts later in the year to support the labor market when the outlook is more steady.
Speaking at Auburn University, Waller added that he said that he may maintain at the policy rate at the current target range if the risks to inflation outweigh those to the labor market. And the White House said a meeting Friday with Anthropic CEO was productive and constructive. Some of the topics discussed include opportunities for collaboration and concerns over the challenges from AI. The Trump administration is looking to get wider access to the company's powerful new Mythos artificial intelligence model. American Airlines said it's not in talks with or even interested in a merger with United Airlines. In a statement, the carrier said a combination would be negative for the competition and for consumers. United's chief executive officer, Scott Kirby, had floated the idea of a merger directly to President Donald Trump back in February. Christina and David.
Lisa, thank you very much.
It's Mythos, right? We've all decided we're going with Mythos. We were debating Mythos. Lisa,
Mythos.
We're going with Mythos. All right, we're going with Mythos.
Student of Greek. Here we go. Word, as we mentioned, that the Strait of Hormuz was reopening sent stocks rallying on Friday, virtually erasing losses from the past 7 weeks of war. At the same time, the price of oil fell to its lowest level in a month now. More uncertainty as Ron says the Strait is closed off once again this morning.
All right, joining us now, Danny Berger, anchor of Open Interest on Bloomberg TV, and Mike McGlone, senior commodities strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence. Danny, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to need the markets to chill a little bit because, and now Monday, where we might see this again. Given the news that the Strait is closed, we had this huge rally on Friday, capped off one of the biggest rallies in decades. The S&P was above 7,100. NASDAQ was on its longest positive streak since 1992, and the Dow was up 1.8. The question I had written down yesterday for you was, do you expect this rally to continue? I think it's still the same question, but possibly with a different answer now.
I think the thing, though, for markets is they're very happy to price in the off-ramp to peace rather than peace itself. So I think given the developments that we've had today and what we'll see over the weekend, and that we're at all-time highs, I think it's fair to say that there's an expectation that maybe we pull back, but still it is a market. I've talked to so many bulls right now that say, look, earnings look good. And in fact, earning expectations have gone up. So the fact that we sold off just made stocks more attractive and valuations more attractive. So even if there's some uncertainty as to whether ships can actually go through the Strait of Hormuz, markets are just excited that there is a whimsy, just an air of peace, that talks are even happening.
You think they're going to give peace a chance?
Markets are absolutely giving peace a chance. Thank you for that, Christina.
Did you write that down too? I feel like that was
not on here, I
promise. Danny, let me pick up on that though. And I'm curious, as you talk to all of these investors and portfolio managers, how much they are 7 weeks into this, tuning out what's happening. You mentioned the fact that expectations for earnings are much better. How much is there a shift underway now, kind of looking through perhaps this war as much as folks can?
I think that's absolutely happening. And I think it's this like Pavlovian urge also to buy the dip, whether it be institutional or retail investors, because they've been burned before. I had a conversation with one sell-side analyst from Oppenheimer, who's the biggest bull on Wall Street, that during the tariff liberation day, he had taken down his estimate for where he saw the S&P 500 ending year end. And he said that was a huge mistake. We rebounded. Stocks looked really good afterwards. And he was like, I was burned. I'm not doing it again. I'm not moving my price expectation. So I feel like it's just this recent history in investors' minds saying we've had big disruptions before and it didn't matter.
And Liberation Day really looming large for a lot of people is kind of like the analog, I think, for folks for what this is like.
I just love a good Pavlov reference. That makes me happy any day.
You're welcome.
All right, Mike, I want to ask you almost the same question, but only with oil, because for me, oil has been a little bit more realistic, coming from the diplomacy, whether or not this is actually going to make a difference. We saw oil plummet yesterday. Brent was down 9%. WTI was dropped 12% to $83. What do you expect to see from oil when it opens on Monday? Do you expect that to continue, or do you think that will change given the light of recent headlines?
Well, I think you got that. Given the recent news, it's probably going to be up a little bit. But I think oil's stuck in a new range now between 80 and 100. If we stay above 100, that breaks things. We're seeing what happens when crude oil rallies at such high velocity. The whole global economy is tilting downward. GDP estimates are lower. If it stays above 100, it'll make it go lower. Below 80, I think eventually it'll get there, but not right now. I think the market's looking at what's happening in the Strait right now is a bit of the battle of the bulge during World War II. We'll get through it. It's just a little bit of an aberration of what happened, and it's eventually a matter of time. It'll be open and free shipping will be there. And then it'll be what happened in markets. And the key thing to remember about commodity markets is there's a complete bull market in elasticity. Now, we saw that in natural gas this year. It went up too much. It was up 100%, got to 7. Now it's down at 2.6. It's down almost 20% year over year. That was the guidance for what happened in crude oil in 2022-23. Natural gas led the way down. And I think it's going to do the same thing. And I like to end with the key thing is we like to skate where the puck's going in futures. And that December crude oil future is running at $72 a barrel. It drops to 22 by the time we get to midterms, when it'll be the front month, it goes to 50. And that's still my call.
But Mike, one of the things we were talking about last weekend is even if the Strait gets fully open, and that's a big if, and there's a timeline for that happening, don't you think that the costs are going to rise just by default because you're going to have to pay these sailors more, you're going to have to pay more for insurance for these ships? The default cost of doing business in that region, I would assume, has to go up.
Absolutely. So we keep talking about 20% of the world's crude oil or exports and production. Maybe it's really now 10% because Saudi Arabia has found ways around it and different things, and we might have sanction relief or Iran can release. So let's talk about the other 80%. And that is, if you look at U.S. and Canada, that excess, the surplus versus a surplus, a supply versus demand is running 8 million barrels a day. And that's becoming a surplus in the market. What stops that from going to 10 million barrels a day? And I'll tell you one key thing that would is lower prices. So that's the shift on the global economy. Is the answers have changed. Now price maker status in crude oil is in the Western Hemisphere, with the center being the U.S.
Danny, I want to return to bank earnings. So you were here all week watching those come out in real time, listening to the conference calls, these chief executives talking to reporters and to analysts as well. A two-part question. One, what is the biggest takeaway from how they've performed and how they're navigating all of this? And the second is, we listened to the likes of Jamie Dimon for some indication of how he's thinking about geopolitical risk broadly. I think he's comfortable talking, he's comfortable opining on it, and people are eager to hear from what he has to say. What did we hear from him, from Jane Fraser, from the likes of these executives about how they're thinking about the impact of this war on their businesses in the Middle East and on the global economy more broadly?
I think it's fair to say that this was the right kind of volatility for them. And I know it always feels heartless to discuss war and saying it's good for business, but for these banks, it was extremely good for business. All of their trading desks, every single bank that reported had record equity trading revenue. Yeah. All of them also had a really strong quarter for M&A despite all of this disruption. And I think that really fed into the commentary you heard from these executives. A couple of them flagged this uncertainty going forward, Jamie Dimon being one of them. But he wasn't as negative as we've heard in the past. In the past, he warned about clouds, storms, hurricanes. And to be honest, they never quite came to fruition. This time he said, look, there are some things out there, specifically the war in Iran, that are big question marks, and we don't know how it will play out. However, we are still really positive. Consumers are still spending a lot. He got questions as to whether high gasoline prices were making consumers pull back. He said, gas prices don't matter. The fact that jobs are plentiful and that market and labor markets are holding up means we're extremely confident. So it was this air of confidence. And again, you could see it in the numbers. They had really strong results.
Your specialty very much is deal making. You have the deal show on Mondays.
Nice plug there.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for that.
Plug where I can do it. But of course, so much attention has been focused on the Middle East as kind of a font for deals in recent quarters. I'm curious what you're hearing from the likes of lawyers and bankers about how this, even if it's just the uncertainty and the pause that we're in right now, is affecting the appetite for those deals going forward. Is it changing the way that the Gulf and the Middle East is perceived right now?
It's such an important question because this has been the source of funding for deals, be it private equity or be it for funding the markets and financing markets. What I've heard is the only thing that's really changed is just the inability or the difficulty to get to that region.
Can't travel.
To travel, to get on a plane, to meet face-to-face with these people.
Which is very important.
It is extremely important, especially for things like fundraising. And you have the fact as well as that these nations are now spending more on their own domestic projects to try to guarantee security. However, we should keep in mind that these are massive sovereign wealth funds, that there's a lot of appetite, and even prior to this war, they committed massive amounts of capital. They are the steady source of funding in a world that's been beset by uncertainty, and that doesn't look like it's changing, even if you can't get bankers literally traveling to the Gulf to meet with these folks.
All right, Mike, I want to ask you about our favorite subject, and that is commodities. We saw gas prices are coming down a little bit, but not as much as I personally would like them, or I'm sure a lot of people. They're down about a dime over the past week. How are we seeing other commodities responding, and how is natural gas doing? Oh, we've got a chart right there.
I'm glad you went there. So first, we mentioned natural gas. Natural gas has been a great lead indicator, and it's U.S. Remember, the thing about natural gas is we have an ocean of natural gas in this country, and it's proven in price. Every time it gets above 5, it goes back down. But it's the number one measure or use or source of heat, electricity, and fertilizer. From the Corn Belt, we just call it anhydrous. So that's not a big thing. But what happened when crude oil pumped, it pumped prices of corn and soybeans. And one thing that's happening in that space is, yes, it's a fertilizer issue, but most of the decisions for this year's crop were made last year. And the key theme is corn and soybeans. But every conference I go to, the key theme they say is, we need some more demand, which means potentially biofuels, which means more fuel. It just increases that superabundance of food and electricity and food and energy in this country. Now, also at the same time, we're seeing a spike in diesel and gas prices. That spike is significant because it really shuts off consumer spending. It messes up capital budget decisions. And it's like one of those things where you look over and like, yeah, honey, we probably should lay low on what we're going to spend for a while until this alleviates. So the data from this period, I think, is going to be pretty bad. And you can see that in the polls. Polls are very negative on Mr. Trump. Obviously, that might change. But overall, this reminds me very much of what happened in 2008 when we had that spike in energy prices and the Great Recession accelerated. And also in 9/11, when the event happened and people just shut off their spending. So that's what I'm worried about as we go forward. And the stock market doesn't care yet.
And how are you feeling about crypto? Because here on the weekend, that's one of the few things we
It's
get
open.
to track live.
Right.
It's that and
Happening.
poly markets, which we're going to talk a lot about later.
Gensler will be here, yeah.
How are you feeling about Bitcoin?
I sense in the space, most people are still, it's like I think of that Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days. They're trying to live the old glory days. That whole bull market is over. Now it's in a purge. And I look at it, it's a space with excessive supply. There's millions of cryptos. Bitcoin had the blessing and curse of being the first. And I fully expect it's going to continue downward. And the key thing, I think I put it in the same bucket as copper, industrial metals. The only way that space can go up is if the stock market goes up. And now they're starting to lag the performance. They used to lead the performance in the stock market. And that started in 2021. Since then, it's been lagging, and most notably since ETFs were launched. So I think Bitcoin's more likely to head towards 50 this year. And we're at a pretty good resistance level right now.
Danny, we've got about 30 seconds, but really quickly, because you always look so chic. LVMH had a bad reporting, and you're seeing that across a lot of luxury brands.
Hermes as well.
Yeah, is that because people in the Middle East are big customers and not spending, or is that just how luxury consumers are feeling right now?
No, they definitely chalked it up to the Middle East. That was a really big factor in it, but you've seen that kind of across the spectrum of luxury goods, not even just clothes, which obviously and handbags I care more about, but things like Ferrari.
Same girl, same, but
yeah. I'm glad, kindred spirits. But Ferrari as well, they've been unable to actually deliver cars to the Middle East. That being said, we had the Rolls-Royce CEO on. They just unveiled this super exclusive car. I think only 100 of them made. He wouldn't say the price because, you know, it's
you have to ask. If you have to
prices.
Ask.
And he said there were plenty of buyers in the Middle East.
Yeah, we're going to have you come back. We're supposed to talk private credit, but if you guys want to keep talking about
No,
it.
it's fine. You can thank our guests.
Danny Berger, host of Open Interest on Bloomberg Television and The Deal Show as well. Mike McGlone of Bloomberg Intelligence joining us here on this Saturday as well. Thank you very much.
All right, it's not just tech companies going all in on AI. How big beauty brands are hoping to cash in. That's coming up next on Bloomberg this weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. The conflict in the Middle East, putting the global economy in the spotlight. During a press briefing, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, she referenced the supply shock.
The membership agreed that the supply shock from the war in the Middle East poses a serious threat to the global economy, even if the conflict ends tomorrow. The infrastructure damage and supply disruptions will inflict a toll for some time to come.
Now, Georgieva added that with each passing day, risks will continue to rise. In other news, the Wall Street Journal reporting the Justice Department is close to filing an antitrust lawsuit against major egg producers, including Cal-Maine Foods, over price fixing. Now, this is the latest in a string of similar lawsuits against the U.S. egg producers. The cost of eggs, well, it's been skyrocketing in recent years because of supply shortages linked to bird flu outbreaks. In February, wholesale egg prices, well, they soared about 94% after plunging nearly 64% in January. And more layoffs coming to Meta. Reuters says the parent company of Instagram and Facebook plans to cut 10% of its workforce, or about 8,000 jobs, next month, with more layoffs even planned for later this year. Meta has been shrinking its payroll as it tries to offset a massive $600 billion spend on AI infrastructure. It's the big spend on the AI that they have to do.
Lisa, thank you very much. Two comments. One,
yes.
Closely watching this because of so much spending on AI, what's going to happen here, and obviously Meta having this reversal. The second thing is egg producers. I find that such a funny phrase, like hens. Chickens are egg producers. To call the industry egg producers, I find. I'm not faulting you, Lisa, but
Multi-tiers of egg producers.
I see where you're
Sorry.
coming from.
I mean, that is fair. It should be like egg distributors.
It's been hitting my ear wrong all week, and I just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you.
All right, well, Lisa's going to circle.
Now for something completely different.
Well, but not
Sorry.
really, because
Okay.
Lisa's going to circle back to AI again, right? Because
Yes.
as we're talking about it permeating pretty much everything we talk about, banking, every industry, it's also permeating beauty.
Yes, I know. And my daughter has droffles of beauty from a lot of these companies. Here's what I did. So I spoke with technology leaders at major global beauty companies about how AI can benefit both consumers and employees, but also about the technology's limitations. The beauty industry has been experiencing its own makeover as personalization, virtual try-ons, and AI skin diagnostics become a part of the everyday shopping experience. According to independent market research platform Wi-Fi Talents, the global AI beauty and cosmetics market is projected to be worth more than $13 billion by 2030. Beauty executives say the artificial intelligence transformation extends from a shift in consumer shopping habits. Mike Maresca is Chief Technology and Transformation Officer at Ulta Beauty.
Consumers are really jumping into AI. They're using it more and more to not only discover, but increasingly shop and inform their decisions that they make. And we're really excited about this. In 2025, we saw really AI-driven shopping jump 115% on Ulta.com.
What kind of AI advancements are you doing on the consumer end?
One area we're actually making great progress is for our online shopper. And that's with our virtual try-on tool, Glam Lab. All you have to do is simply upload a photo of yourself, and you can see what these products look like right on you.
Sephora shoppers get the tech treatment in stores with its beauty skin scan.
It's a device that the consumer can use to capture 3 quick scans of the face. It then matches the consumer with the best complexion or skincare products for them. It's amazing because it works across all skin types and tones. Last year, we did over 180,000 scans per month.
Nadine Graham, Senior Vice President and General Manager of E-commerce for Sephora, says there's also a digital version.
So you upload a selfie, it scans the selfie, it figures out your primary concerns, and then provides a contextual overlay, and then creates a 4-step product routine.
Add to that an AI beauty chat.
We have product recommendations for them, expert advice.
e.l.f. Beauty uses a global digital experience called Color Elfnalysis. Chief Technology and AI Officer Ekta Chopra describes it as a place where users discover makeup shades to complement their features and get matched with a Pinterest board of e.l.f. products.
Now they can go in and use this tool to say, hey, during these seasons, what colors would look good on me, you know? So that's sort of the idea, is like, how do we use AI in meaningful ways?
But what about a product you can only smell, like perfume? Estee Lauder is using an AI chatbot built for its Jo Malone London fragrance. Chief Technology Data and Analytics Officer Brian Franz says description is key.
I really like what feels like on the coast of London when I smell the ocean or I smell the grass. And when you start to just speak to it and you start to have a conversation with the large language model, it's interpreting everything you're saying, and then it's matching. We have an olfactory taxonomy that we use to try to understand all the senses, and then it matches up. And so trying to bring together technology, but the real secret sauce is the data and really kind of looking at what do our scent advisors and our beauty advisors in the store do with consumers.
Is it working? Are more people buying?
When someone actually engages our scent advisor, they're sort of twice the kind of cart size or the purchase.
Beauty companies are also using partnerships to meet the consumer where they are. Sephora is teaming up with OpenAI to launch its app in ChatGPT.
The consumer can browse the full Sephora catalog, they can get product recommendations, advice, even link their Beauty Insider loyalty account.
Estee Lauder is working with Shopify.
You can do your search, you can do your analysis, talk to Gemini Pro or using ChatGPT, and then you can go through and you could purchase, and then it will check you out through Shopify.
And it's not just online. AI is reshaping routine tasks in the office. e.l.f. Beauty uses a number of tools to increase productivity.
When ChatGPT, sort of was showcased in the world, we built our own product called e.l.f. That's our internal ChatGPT that our teams use to write, create, newsletters or product descriptions and things like that. The teams are excited. They're like, oh my God, I'm getting to do new stuff. And the mundane work is being done by AI. AI is the power, and the humans give it purpose.
Ulta is using AI to help drive supply chain efficiencies.
It's getting the product the right place, the right time, at the right cost for our guests.
The company also has a strategic partnership with Google.
We were announced as one of their early strategic launch partners for their agentic AI program. And we're excited about bringing the best of the Ulta beauty experience to the Google and Gemini platforms later this year.
What's the next big thing in AI for beauty?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't call it the next big thing, but agentic, the opportunity with end-to-end taking something where you can solve a consumer problem or make a process very optimized, that's the opportunity.
We just don't chase the next tech trend. And over the last 3 years, we've modernized our core operations. We've made significant investment in our guest-facing platforms to deliver that elevated experience. We've modernized our data platforms, and that's really prepared us well to take on this challenge of AI. And if you take it with that people-centric approach, I think you'll do well.
We want to lean in there and explore. I think for us, being helpful in the consumer journey is important.
The world around us is changing. The number one thing for me is we have to be where the consumer is, and we have to personalize what the consumer wants.
So, it's funny because I see my daughter at home and she has her phone up and she's doing these things. And now I get it. Now I get what she was doing. So she was doing it and trying and seeing the different shades and lip and see if it all works.
Remember years and years ago, you could change your hair on the internet. You could upload a photo and Cosmo or somebody would let you plunk on these Lego hairs and you could test out hairstyles. It's kind of that.
You just wait and see, David Gura. You have a 13-year-old.
You can try on glasses
See?
online.
It's kind of the same.
But
we get you a nice smoky eye, a red lip. It'll be good.
All right, we'll work on that. But clearly this is a huge business.
It's a huge business.
All in on it.
It's a huge business. And what they're seeing are just the different updates and how fast it's changing. I had to actually make changes to this script last minute because more updates were coming. So it's something that's constantly changing. They're constantly updating all the technology that they're using.
Thanks, Lisa.
Lisa, thank you very much.
Speaking of other things that are constantly changing.
Yes.
We want to update you on the current Strait of Hormuz situation. The Iranians have announced this morning that it is closed yet again to traffic.
Yeah, a lot of ambiguity here, starting with that announcement yesterday by the Iranian foreign minister that the Strait was open with some constraints. The president pushing back on that over the course of the day on social media in that speech at Turning Point in Arizona yesterday. Now reports this morning of gunshots fired at tankers in the Strait. The president is expected to speak this morning at 9 o'clock Eastern time from the White House. I should say it's not being billed as anything about Iran, but as is customary, as you know, Christina, the president often fields questions well outside the remit of what he has on the agenda.
There will be reporters in there, and I would bet some of our colleagues will be shouting these questions. All right, coming up next, Lisa's going to bring us our most read stories, and we will have a special guest from Boston. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is time for BT Dubs, or as David calls it, BTW,
Yeah,
insisting
not
on
colloquial.
insisting on the full pronunciation.
Yeah.
Some of the stories you might have missed this week. Lisa, what you got for us?
Okay, so a few weekends ago, we did this story for BTW about a Boston Globe reporter. Her
Yes,
name was
I remember
Emily
it well.
Sweeney. Yes, she was posting her stories to their Instagram, to their TikTok, things like that. They were interesting. She does cold cases, things like that. But what people started taking notice is of her Boston accent and the tracksuit she was wearing. So we have some sound for you that went viral. Take a listen.
Several valuables were stolen, including a Porsche that was used to escape from the property. The car has since been recovered, but the suspect remains at large. The caretaker, who was tied up, managed to escape and go to a neighbor's house for help.
Love that. Okay, so the New York Times now, they did an article. Here's the headline. Why is everyone wicked obsessed with this Boston Globe reporter? We love this. So what we did, we figured out, you know what?
You're also wicked obsessed.
I'm wicked obsessed with her. So reached out, and Emily Sweeney is now going to join us live from Boston.
Yes.
Emily Sweeney, how are you this morning? Glad you can join us. I mean, what was your reaction when you found out your video went viral?
Yeah, it was a total surprise, and I want to thank you because, I listen to Bloomberg all the
Oh my gosh, we love
Thank you.
I'm kind of fangirling here big time because, seriously, you guys are superstars to me.
God.
So I really appreciate it.
I love this.
But yeah, all the attention was totally unexpected.
Because you've been doing these for a while, right? This wasn't your first one.
Yeah, no, I do videos for the Globe, like news reports, just like all the other reporters in the newsroom, and my accent is a little bit harder than some of the others because I grew up in Boston, you know what I mean? So I was really shocked. But the thing is like, what really shocked me more is like just how positive everybody's feedback has been, so it's been kind of restored my faith in media, just to hear so many people like interested in the news and writing to me, so.
But it was the comments. I mean, I saw it before we even started talking about it in the newsroom, and then it just kind of grew and grew. But the comments were really awesome. And one of them was like, I want Emily Sweeney to be the only one allowed me to read the news to me. Like, can Emily Sweeney narrate the Iliad? Like, Emily Sweeney's voice in my head all the time.
I love that Iliad.
It was great.
And now she's everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, for me to be the only one reading the news, I think that's slightly extreme. But, but it has been heartening to hear that people are still interested in the news because, for a long time, I don't know, working at a legacy media organization, it's been hard, you guys know. And, it's been great to see just like this sudden interest in journalism again. It means a lot to me.
Tell us about how you got into journalism. So I detect the Dorchester accent. I'm going to go micro, and I think I've pinpointed that correctly. How did you get into journalism, and what have you covered at the Globe? So you're doing this true crime reporting. Now you've written books as well. How did you get into that?
Yeah. So I've written 3 books, 2 of them about organized crime. I write a lot about unsolved murders. I feel like a lot of people aren't aware of like how many unsolved homicides there are. And, I think it's really important to draw awareness to the cases because sometimes it can help them get solved. So I do a lot of cold case reporting for the Globe. And now I've been doing a lot of video lately, because we've just been getting like a lot of like great engagement from our audience, and it's growing, and we're going to roll with that. And, I'm going to make videos until they tell me no.
Well, speaking of rolling, you've been on rollerblades doing the news too. You've done things like that. I mean, but talk to me about the Boston accent because it's different from different regions where you are, correct?
Yeah. I mean, if you drill down, different neighborhoods have different accents. I'm from Dorchester, which is like the biggest neighborhood in Boston. And, how I talk, like to me, I sound totally normal. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's how my brother has like an even stronger accent.
Incredible.
And,
stronger than that.
Yeah. And so again, it was just a surprise to see, like, everybody thought like in that news report that I was saying, I don't know. I'm like, I thought I was just talking regular.
What accent?
So,
what accent? I think as we talk about it, in a time when journalism is struggling to find its audience and find its feet, 2 things that stood out to me. One was you just came approach as really genuine and authentic. You came approach as someone who was being yourself. You didn't change out of your tracksuit. You weren't putting on airs. You were like, here's my story. Here's what we got. Here's what we talk about. Talk to us about how you guys are reaching a new audience with social media, especially working at a legacy paper. Do you feel like you're making more of an impact, and what that process is like?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, because I definitely have gotten so many messages from, number one, younger people, who, I mean, I'm not sure would even like, watch the news or, pick up a newspaper or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also people from, it's kind of strange, like all over the world, like Australia, Ireland, Guam. I mean, people are writing saying, I'm following the Boston news. Like, so, I just think it's great to draw attention to the great journalism the Globe is doing. And it's great that people are just even interested in news again, I feel like, just in general, and like asking for headlines. Like, you didn't do the headlines today. Where are they? Like, it's been really great to see. So.
Well, we've enjoyed the heck out of it. We got Duncan here.
We're going to eat in
your
solidarity.
honor.
Duncan.
We've got Dunkies.
What's your order? We should have asked in advance, I realize.
I mean, I usually go like extra large coffee,
All right.
Just black, iced. You know what I mean?
You have a specific donut? You got a donut?
I ate so many jelly donuts from Dunks that I have to put. I'm on hiatus.
Yeah, I also don't think those are TV
jelly.
friendly.
They're too good.
We're already trying not to spill coffee on ourselves, but.
Emily, thank you very much. Emily Sweeney, reporter for the Boston Globe, joining us. Fangirl for Boston 92.9. Get that shout out in there. And we'd love to have you back on anytime you want. Please come on set.
And go follow Emily and the Boston Globe because it's great news and great content.
Yes.
All right, we're coming up on 8 a.m. in New York. We're following that breaking news out of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran saying traffic is closed once again. We're going to speak with the Secretary General of the UN Maritime Organization. The next Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 a.m. in New York from Bloomberg's Global News headquarters. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm David Gura, here with Lisa Mateo. We're bringing you the latest breaking news, reports, and analysis live this morning and every weekend from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock Wall Street time. And the big story, without question, as it has been since we launched this show now 2 months ago, is the war in the Middle East. There was this major development yesterday, Christina, the seemingly opening the Strait. Foreign Minister of Iran tweeting this out, saying the Strait was open. We saw markets react in kind with much excitement over the fact that after all of these negotiations, that was in fact happening. Then began this back and forth over social media, mostly between Iranian officials in the United States about what in fact is actually open, how passable that strait is. Markets digested that yesterday. We still digesting them on this Saturday morning.
And we're going to talk to a guest who hopefully can give us some clarity in that. We've had a lot of messaging and a lot of spin, but we want to talk to somebody who knows what's actually going on. But first, we're going to talk to somebody else who knows what's going on, and that's Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And let's get some more of that confusion that is surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's military says it's closed again, and that's after its government declared it open less than a day earlier. So here's what's been happening. Several oil tankers made a U-turn today after appearing to try to transit Hormuz. It's not clear why they changed course. There have been a few disagreements, though. President Donald Trump said he would work with Iran to recover the country's nuclear dust. Trump told Bloomberg in a phone interview yesterday that Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely, but Tehran pushing back, saying it did not agree to give up its enriched uranium. Well, returning to Washington from a Turning Point event in Phoenix late last night, President Trump said Iran and the U.S. will begin negotiating over the weekend. But the president also told reporters aboard Air Force One about the possibility of resuming strikes on Iran once the current ceasefire expires next week.
Maybe I won't extend it, but the blockade is going to remain. But maybe I won't extend it. So you have a blockade, and unfortunately, we'll have to start dropping bombs again.
Earlier at the Turning Point rally in Phoenix, the president said a deal with Iran is not in any way tied to Lebanon.
We will make Lebanon great again. I mean, it's about time we've sort of, the world has forgotten them, and they're good people who have lived like hell for a long period of time. And hopefully the situation with Hezbollah will get straightened out quickly.
The president said he will speak later this morning. We'll bring that right to you. Well, stocks extended their rally on speculation the war could soon end. The S&P 500 reached a fresh record, fueling its biggest monthly advance since 2020. It also posted a third straight week of gains, exceeding 3%. The dollar on Friday briefly erased all of its war-fueled gains, and oil, it plunged to around $90 a barrel. This all leads into a busy week of earnings that includes a lot of defense stocks, as well as companies like Tesla, Intel, and United Airlines. And in other news, speaking of companies, a federal judge has blocked the merger of local television giants Nexstar and rival Tegna. That's until an antitrust lawsuit is resolved. 8 states and DirecTV, they're suing to block that $6.2 billion deal. They say it would hurt competition and lead to higher bills for consumers. Christina and David.
Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That deal, obviously, those suits are something we're going to be watching here over the next few months, but a huge issue with that consolidation in the local TV marketplace.
I mean, consolidation in media, as we were just talking to somebody about a local outlet that's doing well, is a big issue for all of us at the moment. We also are going to look at what's going on in Iran because, as we've mentioned, it is a constantly moving target. We're expecting to hear from the president around 9 a.m. in the Oval. It is on a different topic, as you mentioned earlier, but we do expect him to take some questions, hopefully, on this.
Yes, absolutely. So right now, at the Strait of Hormuz, the British military is saying Iran's Revolutionary Guard opened fire on a tanker transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. This comes as Iran's military command says it's reimposed restrictions after President Trump said yesterday the strait was, in his words, completely open. Joining us now is the Secretary General of the UN's International Maritime Organization. That's Arsenio Dominguez, who we've had on a few times here over the course of this conflict. Mr. Secretary General, great to have you with us. And let me just start with that definition. The president saying the strait is completely open. Is it, in fact, on this Saturday morning?
Listen, yesterday I asked for cautious when that announcement came, particularly because we need to verify the full openness of the Strait of Hormuz. When I immediately contacted the littoral states in the region, including Iran, it was clear that the freedom of navigation is not fully restored because the traffic separation scheme that has been adopted by the IMO back in 1968 is still not open for navigations. There are concerns that they may be mines, which meant that the announcement from Iran about the opening of the Strait of Hormuz was something similar to what they announced earlier, when there would be some connections or some verifications from that side. That actually doesn't follow the right of freedom of navigations. And this is a reason why I asked for cautions and that I was verifying the information, because for us, the full openness has to be in a safe manner.
So you're talking about that TSS traffic pattern, the one that's been there, the ones that ships have been using, that was never really reopened.
That is correct. And at present, there are concerns that there may be mines in this traffic separation scheme. This is one of those areas where several countries met yesterday, led by the United Kingdom and France, in order to provide that assistance to verify and clean the Strait of Hormuz from mines once the conflict comes to an end. We all want progress, but we also need to make sure that any transit in the Strait of Hormuz is not going to be during any dangerous times and, of course, put at risk the life of the seafarers.
A sticking point seems to be, Mr. Secretary General, the presence of this U.S. military blockade. The President of the United States adamant that it stay in place, Iranian officials saying it needs to go. How is that affecting the flow of traffic? And have you gotten any indication that the U.S. is willing to move all of that military might here in the days and weeks ahead?
I haven't received any official confirmation from the United States in that respect. And of course, their announcement is related to traffic that goes into the Iranian ports. So this is slightly different to the way that we are approaching the transit in the Strait of Hormuz. The way that we are working right now is to verify that the strait is fully open once the conflict comes to an end, that there are not hazards like mines, and that the traffic separation schemes will continue to operate just the way that it was doing it before the conflict started. And for that, we already have developed an evacuation plan in assistance with the industry and those organizations that look after the seafarers, as well as the flag states of the ships that are in the Persian Gulf.
Mr. Secretary, you and I were messaging earlier while we were on the air, actually. It's one of the reasons we wanted to have you back on. Do you have any updates on this incident? There may be one, there may have been two incidents where IRGC fast boats appear to have approached tankers, possibly fired on a British ship. Now, it sounds like the crews and the vessels are safe, but what can you tell us about that one or possibly two situations?
The information is quite fluid at present, and we are working in verifying exactly what's happened because of the announcement this morning, again, reverting the openness of the Strait of Hormuz. So there is information of at least one vessel that was approached and was fired at, but there's no damage to the vessels, and thankfully also not a single seafarer has been harmed. These have also been broadcasted to other vessels in the regions. So companies and ship owners continue to be cautious on this. That's the call that I made yesterday. We need to verify what is happening. Some vessels continue to turn off their automatic identification systems in order not to be targeted. And this is why it takes us a few more time in order to actually get the correct information.
For my last question, I'm going to actually steal it from Christina, who's been asking about this over the course of the morning, but I think you can give us the concrete information on all of this. You've spoken with us in the past about how many seafarers are on these vessels in the Strait, some 20,000 in total. How many of them, if any, have been able to get off of those vessels during the course of this conflict, or have they been effectively stuck on those ships over the course of these last 7 or 8 weeks?
A handful of seafarers have actually transit. If we looked into the movements and when some of them use the corridor that the Islamic Republic of Iran introduced, we saw that there were at least sort of 8 or 10 vessels that at any given time transit. Yesterday, we're now verifying the few vessels that managed to sail through the Strait of Hormuz when the information was sent out about the openness of it. We still have a large number of seafarers. Just because a handful of vessels have transit doesn't mean that we have gone down from 20,000 to a more significant reduced number. So the focus remains on roughly that number. Early next week, we will have more information on what is the data in relation to the seafarers seafarers trapped there. But I can tell you one thing: if it's one seafarer trapped in the sea in the Strait of Hormuz, that's one too many.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you very much for joining us on this Saturday morning. That's Arsenio Dominguez, the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization.
Thank you so much, sir. All right, joining us now, our former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq and Iran under President Trump, Andrew Peek, and former Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Near East Affairs under President Biden, Jen Gavito. This is our two favorite DASs, as we say, over at the State Department. We're very happy to have you both back. David, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, Jen, let me start with you and just get a sense from you of how you're navigating the dueling messaging that we're getting from the Iranian officials and from U.S. officials, principally President Trump, about the situation in the Strait. Who are you looking to or listening to for clarity amidst all of this confusion?
At this point, I'm looking for kind of top-line indicators of what direction these talks are headed. I think that your previous guest mentioned caution and fluidity, and I think that's exactly right. Both parties are positioning in advance of what are expected to be a renewed round of talks. And I think, it's always important to remember that nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to. With regard to the Strait specifically, this has been a really important reminder that regardless of what President Trump says or what Iran does in the immediate term, the long-term impact of this is that Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz anytime at once in the future. That is a very disruptive and disconcerting tool that it now has exercised over the course of the last month that won't necessarily be fully resolved, regardless of how this conflict ends.
Andrew, I want to pick up on that because I was going to ask you, for all this weaponry and munitions and lives lost and as we were just talking about, tankers stuck and economic hardship, the U.S. is really not any different, in a different place than it was before they pulled out of the JCPOA the first time. I was going to ask you what was different the second time around, except for it seems to me that Iran might be more willing to give up its nuclear program to please the U.S., knowing that its real card it has to play now is closing the Strait. What is your take on that?
I think that's right. I also think, importantly, the geopolitical situation for Iran is much worse today than it was back in 2018 when we got out of the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, remember, the reasons we got out of the JCPOA was not just the perceived holes in the nuclear piece, but also the effect that it would have on Iran's support of proxies and its development of ballistic missiles, i.e., it would make it tougher to sanction Iran for a variety of reasons if we stayed in the deal. Now, since then, you've had Bashar Assad fall, you've had Hezbollah take a tremendous beating from the Israelis in Lebanon, you've had Hamas take a tremendous beating also, you've had Midnight Hammer. Iran is in a worse place today, and so I think it actually could make more sense focusing specifically on the nuclear issue, and I'm not surprised there's parts of the Iranian government that are willing to deal just on that piece.
Jen Gavito, I heard a colleague here describe what's happened over these last 7 or 8 weeks as Iran exercising a new kind of nuclear option. That is, for many decades, they talked about and planned for closing off this strait to wreak the kind of economic havoc they have over the last 7 or 8 weeks. We saw yesterday in those posts from President Trump adamance that Iran never do this again or be prevented from doing this once again. To what degree has Iran learned here they have a very powerful tool at their disposal, one, I mean, we can quibble with this, that has the power to be, if not as destructive as a nuclear weapon, certainly a very powerful weapon that can disrupt the world economy?
I think that's 100% correct. I still think that all of the things that Andrew just mentioned will remain important parts of its external-facing policy, its missile and drone program, which have not, been addressed as far as I can tell in these current negotiations. The nuclear, we've, arguably, they have now had motivation to move towards weaponization, whereas they had not made that decision in the past. But in the immediate term, what they can really exercise on a day-to-day basis and influence kind of geopolitical direction is, in fact, the closure of global commerce. So I expect that we will continue to see this kind of back and forth where if they don't like the direction things are headed, and I suspect that that's what happened yesterday. They announced that the strait was open, tested the United States, and the blockade remained in place. And so they're showing us that they can close it again. So I do think that we are likely to see this happen quite a bit in the future. And that is particularly bad news, in particular for our Gulf allies on who rely so heavily on the strait in order to conduct virtually all of the commerce that they do, but particularly with regard to the energy sector.
Andrew, one of the things that's complicating, well, our lives here as journalists, but also the lives of people trying to make market predictions and the lives of people just frankly trying to live their lives, is the mixed messaging we're hearing from Iran and from the White House. The president says Iran has agreed to all of these things, and then Iran says we haven't agreed to any of these things. And yet that's the backdrop for these talks that, as far as we know, are expected to happen in Pakistan on Monday. Can you talk to us a little bit about the format of those talks, why there's no working group or expertise involvement in them, and if you think the Pakistanis are being kind of reliable narrators? Are they telling the Trump administration what Iran is really saying, or are they telling the Trump administration what they think the Trump administration wants to hear?
That's a very, very good question. Certainly the Pakistanis love the position they're in. They have their own geopolitical problems on their border with the Taliban. There was a conflict with the Taliban kicking off right about the time the U.S. conflict with Iran was kicking off. The more we focus on this channel through them, the more U.S. goodwill and latent support they're going to have in any coming fight with the Taliban, and also vis-a-vis India. So yes, the Pakistanis want this to continue very much. In terms of signal versus the noise, at least on the Iranian side, I do think there's a couple of things going on. One is that genuinely the two different parts of the remaining Iranian regime probably have a tough time talking to each other. Everyone's concerned about communications. Everyone thinks they've been hacked. So it's not clear. It's not that easy to get everyone to clear things. Also, I think it's important to remember, even under the JCPOA, that the Revolutionary Guards never really bought into that. They were basically told to do that by the Supreme Leader. That's not something that they were wildly enthusiastic about. The Supreme Leader basically gave it to the Foreign Ministry to, hey, run and see if you can get a deal to alleviate the economy. Now, without a Supreme Leader, or without one who's as old and sort of set as Khamenei, it's going to be even more challenging to get consensus.
Jen, we've only got about 30 seconds, but I did want to get your take on that, of the form of these talks and the Pakistanis as mediators.
Yeah, I think that they have done an admirable job of getting us this far. And I do think that the fact the parties are continuing to talk is a very positive signal that there is a formula to be found. What that looks like in the end, again, I would exercise caution at this point, because in addition to the points that Andrew rightly makes, I think also, this formula is complicated. And so, again, going back to nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to, everything will fall into place. And I do think that Lebanon remains an important part of this.
I agree with that. And unfortunately, we are going to have to leave it there. Jen Gavito, Andrew Peek, thank you both so much for lending your expertise to us this morning.
Well, coming up here, we're going to talk about prediction markets, which are growing fast and becoming harder and harder to police. The former chair of the SEC is going to join us to talk about what can be done. Gary Gensler has risen from the partnership at Goldman Sachs to the highest echelons of regulation in Washington, D.C. He's taught at MIT. He is now trying his hand at podcasting. He has a new podcast with Simon Johnson. The focus of a recent episode is on prediction markets, and certainly this is a subject of great fascination for a lot of people as we look at bets, event bets that were placed in advance of the capture of Nicolas Maduro, and of course the killing of Iran's supreme leader. Gary Gensler, the former chair of the SEC and the CFTC, joins us next here on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, and of course, the Bloomberg Anywhere.
Stick with us. We'll be right back.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly, well, she says that interest rates are in a good place. Now, it comes as policymakers wait to see how the Iran conflict plays out.
They think right now policy's in a very good place, slightly restrictive, not constraining the economy so much that the labor market's faltering, not letting go of the reins completely so that inflation has no bridle. And that's a good place to be.
Daly speaking at an event at UC Berkeley. Now, she added that leaving rates unchanged will restrain inflation. Policymakers, they meet again April 28th. Well, the White House said a meeting Friday with Anthropic CEO was productive and constructive. Some of the topics discussed include opportunities for collaboration and concerns over the challenges from AI. The Trump administration is looking to get wider access to the company's powerful new Mythos artificial intelligence model. An American Airlines said it is not in talks or interested in a merger with United Airlines. In a statement, the carrier said a combination, well, it would be a negative for competition, also negative for consumers. Christina and David, United's chief executive officer, actually floated the idea of that merger directly to Donald Trump back in February.
I don't like this, you guys. You already told me I should have bought my plane tickets.
Miles,
this is not going to help. Thanks, Lisa. All right, a federal government agency is reportedly investigating possible insider trading involving big swings in oil markets ahead of a major policy announcement by President Trump.
The Commodity Futures Trading Commission is examining at least 2 instances where trading volume surged right before those announcements were made. Joining us now is Gary Gensler, the former chairman of the CFTC. He also served as the chairman of the SEC and has a new podcast called Power and Consequences. It's you and the Nobel laureate Simon Johnson dealing with a lot of these issues. Prediction markets is what we want to talk the most about. But let me ask you quickly about this story. You helmed the agency after the global financial crisis. There were a lot of raised eyebrows after word of this trade came out. What is your read on what's happening here? And maybe take us behind the scenes of what the CFTC might be doing as it looks into this.
One, the only way that the American public can have confidence in markets is they think that insiders can't get ahead of them with material information. I mean, that's just not fair, right? But two, the only way we can have confidence in our government is that we don't think that somebody in government or their friends or family are trading ahead of us, right? So those two things are really important. And we knew that 16 years ago. After the financial crisis, we were putting reforms in place. And I was honored to head this thing called the CFTC. And we were going to Congress. And I have to tell you a little story about Eddie Murphy.
Okay, the comedian?
The comedian, yes.
An actor?
An actor. And he had done this movie, Trading Places.
This is a legendary movie in my household. I never understood the end of it until like a year ago, but yes, this is an amazing movie.
And it's an amazing movie where Eddie Murphy is trading these things called futures. It's a contract where it's the
frozen
future.
Concentrated orange juice.
There you go. There you go.
Gotcha.
But do you remember, Christina, what he was trading it on? He was trading it on a report from the Department of Agriculture about the orange crop.
He basically had inside information.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I get to the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I asked the staff, I said, well, that's illegal, right? And they go, well, boss, no. There was a lot of mumble. And wonderful people. So we went to Congress in the midst of all that. And we said, we've got to get something. And I used to say it was the Eddie Murphy provision.
Okay.
It's got to be illegal. Yeah. Well, guess what? We were successful. Al Franken, who was in that movie and was a senator, had a great yucks on a couch in his office. But here's where it is today. It is illegal for a government actor, somebody who works in the government, to pass on information to somebody and to have that person knowingly or with reckless disregard of the knowledge trade on that information. Also, it's illegal for that government actor to do it.
Yeah.
So it's both the government actor or somebody passing on.
But how do you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's illegal.
Yeah.
But how do you prosecute it? Because it can't be easy, because it's not like these trades all have the person's name on them. They go through intermediaries, they go through trading desks. Talk to us about how the investigation works. You have to figure out who did it, when they did it, what information they have, and if it was public information or not.
It's hard. It's hard. And I was honored to run federal law enforcement agencies twice. One in the commodity space, one in the security space. And so the staff is doing this, not the political appointees, but the staff is doing it with a lot of technology, now using artificial intelligence as well, tracking and looking for patterns, just like you do at Bloomberg, looking for patterns. Is there a spike in trading for 3 minutes before something happens? Like we saw late in March, I think it was March 23rd, like you've all reported we saw again on April 7th, like various members of the House and Senate on both sides of the aisle have written, Senator Warren, but others also, Senator Whitehouse and others have written. And so I would think, yes, the government's going to investigate these things. But to your point, Christina, it's hard because it's about pattern recognition and then getting behind that and saying, well, who actually traded? Yeah. And even if you identified, David, I'm not saying you did this, but if David, somebody in your production booth, your control room, in the 1 second delay that we have here, traded on whatever information, even in that 1 second, they might be trading on material non-public information. I'm not saying they are.
No, of course not.
Right,
we'll follow up after.
If they don't show up for their shift, we'll know something's happened. But so far, our team is all still here. So
Right. But then what happens if all those government actors show up for their shifts? They're in a situation room, or maybe they're handling President Trump's tweet.
Yeah.
Or they call it X now.
Right.
It's same.
Or Truth Social.
Yes.
Right? So that's important. look, I think also Congress is looking at whether to ban certain contracts, prediction markets. Now, think about it.
Well, let me use that as a segue. We had Alyssa Slotkin on the show talking about a ban that she's suggesting be put in place for government officials. They shouldn't be able to make bets.
Congressional staffers, members of Congress, yeah.
And in that interview, it was kind of clear that there was some ambiguity surrounding who's regulating these spaces. So as we talk about prediction markets, and you on a recent podcast episode point out, people have been betting on things for centuries. Talking about betting on the Pope, who's that going to be back in the 15th century, whatever. Is it well regulated? When we look at Kalshi, which is domiciled here in the United States, Polymarkets is not, it's overseas and subject to less regulation. Is there an adequate regulatory apparatus surrounding all of this right now?
I think that collectively people will probably agree, no.
No.
Right now, no. One, you're right. Humans have been betting on things since antiquity. But how it's regulated, and at least on sports betting, we've done that at the state level.
Yeah.
And I worked on that reform back in 2010. Mm-hmm. I don't remember a single member of Congress, a single senator or House member saying, oh, we're going to give you your little agency, Gensler. We're going to give you authority to regulate all this gaming.
And this also isn't a really pro-regulatory environment right now. That's just not where the winds of federal government seem to be.
No, but I can tell you this. The majority leader at the time, Senator Harry Reid, would have never voted for something to basically preempt Nevada gaming.
The gentleman from Nevada. That's right.
No,
yes.
it's rather absurd to think that's what Congress meant to do. Now, the courts, that will play out. That's about sports betting. Mm-hmm. But now you have these geopolitical events. And we did work with Congress at the time to have a prohibition put in place on any contracts on assassination, war, terrorism, gaming, and otherwise unlawful acts. And that was something that they gave to the CFTC that we could prohibit. I thought we voted on that. I remember voting on that. It was a rule, 40.11, I think. Uh-huh. And so I thought we voted on that. It was
settled.
Well, sometimes in life, things that you think are settled aren't settled.
Spoken as a true lawyer here.
No, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a markets guy.
That's very true. That's true.
But I would say this. I think that prediction markets, some things, we might just say as a society we're going to ban. And yes. You talked about the Pope in 1591. Gregory XIV said no betting on papal conclaves.
Some things are off the table.
That's just off the table. But guess what? In that reform effort in 2010, Congress said we can't bet on movie. That's right, on box office receipts. Howard Lutnick was running Cantor Fitzgerald at the time. He's now the Secretary of Commerce. Yes. He came into us and said, we want to start a contract on movie futures. What do you think, CFTC? And we looked at it and we voted. It was a split vote, 3-2. We lost one Republican, one Democrat, actually. But we voted and we said there's an economic purpose here. You're hedging some risk. The movie industry, Hollywood, reacted negatively. And they had a vehicle, this reform thing going through. Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont took that side, got an amendment in. That is illegal. You cannot bet on movie futures in this country, nor can you bet on onions. And that was Gerald Ford in the 1950s.
Okay, so we can't bet on movie futures or
it's
onions.
A great lesson in lobbying.
But we can
in Washington,
100%.
Yes.
I covered DC for 17 years. But you can now bet on going to war. You can bet on all these real huge outcomes.
But not on assassination, war, or terrorism. I thought I voted on that 16 years ago.
But I mean, talk to us about the larger picture of this, because we're in an era of so much data and commoditization, and refining everything down to the numbers. I do worry, and I'm not a very touchy-feely person, but I do worry about what it does to us when you are marketizing things like acts of war and people dying in conflicts and these huge geopolitical events.
Which could have economic consequences, I should add.
Of course.
Absolutely. And there's day trading, and people who watch this show know that people can trade on options that are expiring the same day.
Yeah.
And we try to allow the retail public and the big institutions to trade and meet in those markets, or even to buy and sell and speculate on the price of oil. if it's well regulated and we guard against insider trading and the like. But then there's some things that you would say, really, do they have economic consequences? Do we want to have that? Now, why we banned onions in the 1950s and why we banned movie futures in the 2010, but assassination, war, terrorism, death contracts. Yeah. Like even in 18th century England, and this was a real problem at Lloyd's of London, which was at a coffee shop. King George II in the 1740s had to deal with his noble lords say, hey, we're losing too many times to the pirates. Can we ban betting on ships going down? They use different words.
Yes.
Admiralty insurance, you have to have an insurable interest in the ship. So maybe you have to have an insurable interest to have terrorism insurance.
We have got a minute left here. Where do you see this? How do you see this developing here over the next year? Groundswell of public interest and leads to what?
It's a challenge. I think that this administration will try to do their best to push out insider trading, and that's because they have an interest in promoting this. Two, the courts will play out. I don't think it was Congress's intent to preempt state gaming laws, but this administration wants to take that on and have a little agency of 500 people be a national gaming regulator. Yeah. I think I don't.
You don't
and then
see the
I
evolution.
think Congress. I hope Congress takes up some prohibitions on certain, like death and assassination contracts.
Okay. All right, on that cheerful note, we're going to have to leave it there. Gary Gensler, thank you so much for coming in.
Gary Gensler, yes, all of that.
And the Eddie Murphy Rule. That was
New
great.
podcast, Power and Consequences with Simon Johnson. Coming up here, how concerned should we be about a possible private credit bubble? What does it mean for small businesses? Bloomberg anchor Danny Berger and Wall Street veteran Bill Cohan of Puck are with us next on Bloomberg This Weekend, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. Well, the conflict in the Middle East putting the global economy in the spotlight. During a press briefing, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva referenced the supply shock.
The membership agreed that the supply shock from the war in the Middle East poses a serious threat to the global economy, even if the conflict ends tomorrow. The infrastructure damage and supply disruptions will inflict a toll for some time to come.
Georgieva, she added that with each passing day, those risks will continue to rise. More layoffs coming to Meta. Reuters says that the parent company of Instagram and Facebook, they plan to cut 10% of its workforce, or about 8,000 jobs next month, with more layoffs that are planned for later this year. Meta has been shrinking its payrolls as it tries to offset a massive $600 billion spend on AI infrastructure. And New York City doormen and building owners, well, they reached a potential labor agreement averting what would have been the union's first strike in 35 years. And Christina and Data, the potential 4-year contract, it gives doormen, porters, also handyman those wage increases each year and a 15% boost to monthly pension checks for future retirees.
I know about this because my building was one of these buildings where all of our doormen who I talk to every day were handing us little ID badges because they weren't allowed to let anyone up if they went on strike. So you had to, anyone who came to my apartment had to be pre-approved and have their name printed and stuff like that.
I heard scuttlebutt some residents might be like volunteering to take shifts in some.
It was like a whole thing, and then I came home from here last night, and one of our guys was like, "We got a deal. You have to see me tomorrow." And I was like, "I've never been so happy." So good for them.
Cheers.
Good. Never had a doorman before. This is all new before.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, thanks, Lisa. All right, on a more serious note, private credit has been in the spotlight as concerns that software portfolios are vulnerable to AI disruption begin to mount.
Major banks saying it's not a systemic crisis in the making, but Wall Street closely monitoring private credit portfolios with the global financial crisis in the rearview mirror, of course. Joining us now, Bloomberg TV anchor Danny Berger once again, and Puck founding partner Bill Cohan. Bill, let me start with you. Always good to gauge your level of worriedness about something like this. Are you seeing these restrictions on withdrawals and the likes and feeling like something is on the horizon here, something worth us noting?
Well, David, maybe I'm like the boy who cried wolf a few times, but we are overdue, shall we say, for some sort of financial correction, right? Usually, as a Wall Street historian, usually these things happen once every 20 years or so. So it's been 18 years, right? So we're probably due for something. So that feels like maybe something is imminent, but I don't think this private credit is going to be the catalyst. I think this is a big overreaction, frankly. I can elaborate.
Please.
Okay.
I was going to prod you to do so, but go ahead.
So, I mean, let's think about this. If we're really, like, if you create a fund and you say people can only take out 5% of their money, every quarter, and you're a retail investor and people start making noises about being worried about software credit or something like that, and your broker says, well, maybe you really should think about taking money out. Of course you're going to take money out and ask questions later. So everybody floods to that, and then it becomes headlines that, more than 5% people are seeking redemptions, and everybody's starting freaking out, and it's contagious. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about basically 97% of the securities in these funds, or private credit generally, is senior secured debt. Okay, senior secured debt, top of the food chain. If we want to be worried, we should be worried about the equity down at the bottom of these companies or these leveraged buyouts or whatever these credits are. Nobody seems to be talking about their concern about the equity.
No.
If you're going to be worried, let's worry about the equity holders, and then maybe down the road we can worry about the senior secured.
As a millennial, I'm more worried about another financial crisis. Thanks for that. But Danny, you were nodding when he was saying equity. Talk to us about why that's a concern.
I mean, this is, I have to say, I've heard this argument a lot, and I think it makes complete sense, just given where the capital stack exists, where credit exists. That's going to get paid out first. You have to worry about the equity if a loan is going to zero. It's something that I have to say Blue Owl makes the argument of quite frequently, and it's completely fair. Also, if you're in a credit cycle, what's happening to the equity market? What's happening to public equities if you're in the middle of a credit cycle? So it's not just private credit, and I think it is important to contextualize how big this universe is. It's just under $2 trillion. The BDC, these retail funds, are even a smaller amount of it, and most of these funds gate them at 5%, so only 5% of those even smaller funds are coming out. It's something that John Zito from Apollo has said, if you can't meet these redemptions, I think he said something along the lines of, like, you're a fool, not exactly that, but basically saying they amount to a rounding error for us, the amount of money that's being pulled out. Look, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues, especially for specific funds that have essentially built themselves around these being the profit drivers for them or the future drivers of growth, but it's not necessarily systemic.
Bill giving us this hypothetical, the retail investor calling the broker and getting nervous. I think a lot of people seized on Jamie Dimon's kind of markets entomology a few months back when he talked about cockroaches. I mean, it's something very vivid that a lot of people seized on. Again, you've been tracking bank earnings over the course of the week. What have bank executives said about what is effectively one of their rivals? I mean, they are taking business away from some of these major banks.
I don't know if you got this too, but it felt kind of like a pullback from Jamie Dimon. He wasn't as forceful when he talked. He didn't bring up cockroaches or anything like that. And in fact said that if we have some sort of crisis, I don't think that private credit is going to be the thing that causes it. And by the way, any ruptures in the business, to your point, is good for these banks. I mean, they do have exposure. JP Morgan has about $50 billion, which they laid out. But broadly, syndicate markets get a little bit more popular when you start to see pullbacks on private credit. You have started to see there was really intense competition. It still exists, but it feels like it's ebbed a bit.
So go ahead.
I mean, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about loans that banks have been making for generations, for millennia. So Jamie Dimon is like one of the biggest lenders that there is. So he's in the private credit business. Yes, because after Dodd-Frank, after the 2008 financial crisis, Gary Gensler and his fellow regulators, wanted to push that kind of business off the books of the central banks, the big banks on Wall Street. They became in the moving business, not in the storage business. So what happened? Around all that new regulation, up comes, the Apollos, the Blackstones, the KKRs, the Blue Owls, all of them who are the sort of private credit leaders. And by the way, that business took off. They all used to be just private equity guys. Now all of a sudden they're private credit guys or they're alternative asset management guys. They're all in the same business. They're all doing the same thing. And they're all sort of filling the hole that was left by when GE Capital went out of that business in 2015. So they're all making loans to, inventory finance or mobile home finance or things that basically nobody really wants to do, but they're senior secured at the top of the credit structure. And so what are we really worried about here? Yes, it's great headlines, and it's fun to see people want more than 5% of their money out when, they can only take 5%, they want 7.5%. What do we do? Do we put more money in, or do we gate them? What do we do? So it's an event, but
All right, we've got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to start with you, Bill, and then I want to go to Danny. If we're not worried about private credit, what are we worried about?
It's an impossible question. You know that, Christina.
What is keeping you up at night?
Well, I mean, again, I think human nature is such that people forget the last
short memories.
So I'm worried about the excess valuation, the toppiness to the valuations. I mean, the AI. I mean, we all talk about AI. I mean, AI is probably going to be revolutionary, but valuing these things at infinite multiples of earnings. I mean, it's bound to come down, but shorting them is a very dangerous game too. So.
Danny?
I'm worried kind of on the existential AI thing and what it means for our labor markets. I know that's completely feels non sequitur, but what we're talking about. But to be fair, it is part of the ruptures we've seen in private credit. We've seen kind of trickling in companies talking about layoffs because of AI. It could be a little bit of AI theater, but are politicians prepared for this? We've seen backlash in communities about building data centers, which, by the way, private credit, that's been a huge business for them. I feel like we're moving towards something and we haven't fully thought out what that end game looks like from politicians, regulators, and even capital markets and valuations. I feel like we're kind of putting the plane together as we're flying, and that worries me a bit.
And no one rings a bell at the top of the market.
No.
And no one, very rarely can you anticipate the crisis that's going to occur until it occurs.
Bill Cohan, you're going to come back here in a bit. You've got a new movie out, a book on the way, plenty to talk about. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Danny Berger, thank you very much for coming in.
Danny, it's been great.
On a Saturday,
thank you for coming in. It's been
of course,
a joy.
the anchor of Open Interest and the Deal Show on Bloomberg Television. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. All right, speaking of AI, the leaders of Anthropic were at the White House yesterday for what's being called peace talks over its AI battle with the Pentagon. Bloomberg Tech's e.l.f. is going to join us next to explain.
Take us with you no matter where you go. You can watch us on Bloomberg TV, listen on Bloomberg Radio, or stream us at Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg.
Anthropic's CEO Dario Amodei has a meeting at the White House on Friday, a sign that tensions may begin to ease between the company and the U.S. government.
According to a memo reviewed by Bloomberg News, the U.S. government is seeking wider access to Anthropic's new Mythos AI model as they prepare to make a version available to major federal agencies amid concerns of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Ed Ludlow, anchor of Bloomberg Tech, joins us now here in New York on set. Wonderful to have you with us. Talk about the gravity, the importance of this meeting. It was not between Mr. Amodei and Mr. Trump.
This was strange
Susie
to
Wiles
me,
was there, showed up yesterday afternoon. What do we know of what was expected to be discussed, and indeed what came out of that meeting?
I mean, Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, I understand, continues to also be involved in sort of constant conversation. Curiously, and as an aside, I believe the president was asked on the tarmac if Mr. Amodei had a meeting at the White House, and his response was, Anthropic, who's that? But
I have it right here. Did Anthropic have a meeting at the White House? He responded, who? And then said, I have no idea.
Yeah. But the official communication from both the White House and the company itself is that the meeting was a much broader agenda of cooperation, safety in AI, responsibility in AI. But of course, in the background, you have Mythos, which is a general purpose model with very specific competence in cybersecurity, and the US government across different agencies wanting to use it, right? We've gone from a place where Anthropic has tried to do a limited release, where a number of corporate entities have access to it, and we can get into what they're doing with it, to limited government sort of supervision of that, to now wanting to use it for the benefits that the model could potentially give.
Talk a bit more about it. We've had trouble just pronouncing it over the course of...
We're going with Mythos, right?
Yeah, let's go with Mythos.
This is a nascent technology, and this is a new iteration of what we've learned a lot about.
Yeah.
What can it do, and what from that inspires fear or, I guess, excitement among some people in government?
Mythos is a general purpose model. It's not specifically a model trained or designed for cybersecurity. It just so happens that it is good at going the next step. So what we're talking about is an AI model that, if given restricted access to a code base, could be the source code of a bank or a payment system or a financial institution, it can very quickly identify vulnerabilities. This is flaws in the code. It presents a point of access.
And it can then exploit them?
And different from other models, it can take that next step. To exploit means to take an action, to leverage the vulnerability in a number of ways. That could mean a change in the code. It could mean an instruction. And the point with Mythos, why we say it is a powerful model, is there is an aspect of autonomy to it. It has the ability to say, okay, I've identified this, I'm now going to act. And that is distinct from a model that would only identify vulnerabilities. Something really key. This is a very normal part of the cybersecurity industry. There are armies of hackers and bug bounty hackers.
White hat.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And a hacker in this context is a good guy.
Yeah.
That spend time finding these vulnerabilities and making proposals on how to remedy them. And that is not being displaced or at question here. The issue is that you have a piece of software, an AI model that can go that next step, and that presents risk, particularly if it falls into the hands of a bad actor.
It's interesting to me, the shift that has occurred, because previously something this powerful would have been created by a state actor, right? The governments and things like that in eras past were the ones who were really leading this technology.
Or rather that in the past, a bad actor would have been a nation state or, in a form of espionage, for example.
Exactly right. So what I wanted to ask you is, so talk to us a little bit about that dynamic. And then if this is used by the US government, this might be a dumb question, but I literally don't know. If it is released into places, like if it is used to try to get into someone's system, could the Chinese, could the Russians then harness that and turn it back around?
That's why this story is so important for the American public and for the global public, right? There are no dumb questions here because the situation is really simple. This is a model that is good at going into very large bodies of code, software, that underpin some of the most important systems, financial systems, payment systems, utility systems. And the reason that the US government is advocating for access and then use in different federal agencies is there is a benefit to it. How good would it be to go on the defense, find those vulnerabilities and do something about them? On the other hand, the risk, and this is what we've reported, right? Secretary Bessent, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, basically getting all of these bankers in the room and saying, take this seriously, there is a risk here, but actually also use it to your advantage. All of us need to acknowledge that if this were to fall into the hands of a malicious or bad actor, you would be at risk. And that's the tension here.
And certainly something that was animating a lot of conversations at the IMF and World Bank spring meetings in Washington. We have about a minute left, Ed, but it seems almost quaint to talk about Claude now. But what does this do to that roiling debate between the administration and Anthropic, a debate that's also moving to the courtroom?
So in the press, right, there's this idea that because Dario Amodei met with Susie Wiles, that there's a sort of detente, that they're able to find some middle ground and warmth between the US government. There is still a legal dispute with the Pentagon. The Pentagon has identified Anthropic as a supply chain risk because Anthropic had two red lines. Don't use our AI models for surveillance of Americans. Don't use them to automate mass swarm weaponry, essentially. That's a red line for them. The industry basically says it's not up to the companies. The government should be able to use technology in defense of America how it wants. That litigation stands. And so, they are basically mutually exclusive, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
All right, Ludlow, I hear you're coming back at the end of the show to play our pointed news quiz with us.
Another winning victim here.
How are you feeling? You ready?
I don't have a good track record in that game,
but let's see. Neither do I.
I don't either. We embarrass ourselves every week. Come join us. We have Dunkin' Donuts today.
Not you. All right, we are coming up here on 9 a.m. in New York, waiting comments from President Trump any moment from the Oval Office. He's at the White House, very likely to take questions on Iran as the government there says the Strait of Hormuz is now closed again. Bloomberg This Weekend continues right now.
The main thing is that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and that supersedes everything else.
Good morning. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It's about 9 a.m. in New York. We have breaking news. President Trump says he'll answer questions about Iran at this hour.
And there's a lot for reporters to ask him about as Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is restricted once again. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, coming to you live from Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We are, of course, here with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, April 12th, and we are keeping an eye on the White House. We've got some live pictures for our TV viewers, where, as we just mentioned, the president is set to hold an event at any moment. Lisa, he says he's going to answer questions about Iran if they're asked. That's not what we think the event is about. It's about something else entirely.
Yeah, most definitely. And this is from CBS, too. CBS is saying that the president is expected to sign an executive order that will encourage more research into the psychedelic ibogaine. Now, it's a Schedule 1 controlled substance. Now, the order is reportedly not going to push to reclassify that drug. But yes, he's also expected to take questions from reporters about the war in Iran since the latest changes to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran's military, they are now saying the waterway is shut down. It comes less than a day after leaders in Tehran, they said it was open after Israel agreed to a ceasefire in Lebanon. Several oil tankers made a U-turn today after appearing to try to transit Hormuz. We're also getting word from owners of those oil tankers saying that there is gunfire in that area. It is not clear why some of those ships did change course. There have been a few disagreements. President Trump told Bloomberg in a phone interview yesterday that Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely. But Tehran, they're pushing back. They're saying it did not agree to give up that enriched uranium. Now, returning from Washington from a Turning Point USA event in Phoenix late last night, President Trump said Iran, the U.S., they will be negotiating over the weekend. But the president also told reporters aboard Air Force One about the possibility of resuming strikes on Iran once the current ceasefire expires next week. He added that the blockade, it would remain in place. Now, earlier at the Turning Point rally in Phoenix, the president said a deal with Iran not in any way tied to Lebanon. Well, stocks, they extended their rally on speculation the war would soon end. The S&P 500 had reached a fresh record. It fueled its biggest monthly advance since 2020. It also posted a third straight week of gains, exceeding about 3%. Now, the dollar on Friday, it briefly erased all of its war-fueled gains, and oil plunged to around $90 a barrel. This all leads into a busy week of earnings. David and Christina, includes many defense stocks as well as companies like Tesla, Intel, and also United Airlines they'll be talking about.
A busy week. Lisa, thank you very much.
Thanks,
and
Lisa.
You said it was April the 12th.
Yeah, we need to clarify what week it is. It is the 18th.
You're forgiven, but it kind of encapsulates the level of kind of confusion we are in right now, continuing to track, of course, developments in the Middle East, and we are in this moment where there is so much confusion over what indeed is open, what's closed, which ships can get through or can't. We're going to pull up some live pictures here for those of you watching on Bloomberg.com or on television of the White House in Washington, D.C. The President of the United States scheduled to speak any moment now, 9 o'clock agenda item on his official schedule. I should say not one, Christina, that has to do with Iran specifically. That's not how it's being billed. But as you and I both know, viewers and listeners as well, the president is one who will often verge into other topics.
There will be press in the room, and you can bet they will be asking about this. And you know what? Say what you will. There is always a chance to ask this president a question, and that is a nice thing for reporters.
We, of course, monitoring that very closely. Back with us, Bloomberg's White House correspondent Jeff Mason and the Associated Press's international correspondent Philip Crowther joins us from Islamabad. And with us here on set, Michelle Hussein, host of the Michelle Hussein Show. Great to have you here from London. Philip, let me start with you and just get a sense of your understanding of the state of play. You were there in Pakistan last weekend for those talks with Vice President J.D. Vance. There hasn't been an official announcement of a second round of those talks. What are you hearing from sources there on the ground of what might happen there in the coming days when it comes to negotiations over peace in the region?
Well, look, there's certainly optimism that Islamabad can be the city and indeed Pakistan, the country, as the facilitator that puts up a second round of talks between the United States and Iran. Of course, as you just mentioned, there's all sorts of confusion right now as to whether these two sides are close enough right now or can come close enough over the next few days to actually meet in person. It seemed like everything was falling into place yesterday, essentially, the announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, and that was a holding ceasefire, and indeed largely still is. That is a key building block toward further talks between Iran and the United States. Then the announcement from the president that the Strait of Hormuz was open again. That was an announcement that was mirrored by the Iranian foreign minister. But then It was, again, entirely stopped by the Iranian leadership. It now says the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And indeed, the UK military, which is the authority on this kind of thing, says that not one but two ships, one tanker and one cargo vessel, have been attacked. One by Iranian gunships of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. That's according to the UK military. So things not exactly under control right now, I think is the fair way to put it. But that doesn't mean that the two sides cannot get together at the negotiating table. The rhetoric can be all over the place at the high level, and it might even be for domestic consumption in the United States and Iran, indeed, as well, while the two sides still are able to get together at the negotiating table and somehow not necessarily come to an overarching peace agreement, but at least get that little bit closer, at the very least in the short term, to extending a ceasefire, because the ceasefire between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other, it is only 2 weeks long. It's only got a few days left, and that needs to be extended. That is why Pakistan hopes it can get the two sides together here in Islamabad as quickly as possible.
Michelle, I want to bring you in because you did a really great podcast talking about how Pakistan ended up where it is, with the only real country, with maybe one other exception, that could facilitate these talks. And then how well are they going to be able to execute this? Because it's a terrible position. If we've been saying Iran is saying one thing is true, the president of the United States is saying the other thing isn't true. Is it clear what the Pakistanis are saying either to the U.S. or to Iran?
Well, I think we probably all understand that what happens actually in a negotiation at the point that the parties meet, the most successful ones, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. Right. And it's clear that in the last week since the Islamabad talks happened, Pakistan has been busy on the diplomatic front. So the army chief went to Tehran a few days ago. So there have been like face-to-face meetings as well as the working of the phones. I think they will be really hoping that the relationship that was built up with the Trump administration in the last year continues to bear fruit. And frankly, it is really the only diplomatic possibility in this very complicated world that we have. Pakistan hasn't had the easiest relationship with Iran. About 18 months ago, they were striking what they call terrorist hideouts on each other's soil. So that hasn't been without its own complexity, but they have found themselves in this pivotal position. So they're going to continue to try and use that as much as possible. But I think it's clear from the gap between what the president has said in the last 24 hours, from what we know is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, and also from what the Iranians are saying, that there is an immense task to do, that even at the point where there is some kind of agreement, how fragile it is likely to be. So we're 7 weeks into this, and if anything, while we have some moments of hope, I think it continues to be an incredibly complex and confusing international situation.
Seems like a very tall order, not a lot of time.
Jeff Mason, on the issue of complexity and what you're hearing from the White House about how they're viewing this conflict and the next steps forward, you have a president who, at least if you read these social media posts, seems very eager for this to be over, to put some real finality on all of this. We were speaking with Phil Crowther just a moment ago about the prospects of continued talks in Pakistan. Are we hearing anything from the president's aides about what those might look like, the appetite for those talks, and indeed if the vice president would be the point person for those talks if they were to happen once again?
Well, the president's aides don't want to get ahead of the president. So that's a kind of a constant challenge, I think, both for the people who work in the White House and for those of us who cover it. They take their signals from what the president is saying, and we do too. The president has said that he could potentially go to Pakistan. That seems pretty unlikely given the security situation. What I've been told by at least one aide at the White House is that it's likely to be the same trio that we saw the last time. So Vice President Vance, Jared Kushner, who's the president's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, who has served as an envoy for President Trump in Russia and on the Iran talks. So that's likely to be the cast of characters. But again, there's still a question mark over when this will happen. And there's also a question mark over whether or not they've actually laid out the sketches of a peace deal in the way that President Trump has said. The president, again, really helping boost sentiment about within the markets and elsewhere on Friday with his positive language about a potential deal. But Iran has not been confirming most of the elements that the president said have been agreed.
And I believe we have, I'm not sure if we have them ready, the pool is getting ready to go in. I think we have some live pictures from the White House. Yes, we do. This is the president in the Oval Office. Wait, it's on a different topic. He's speaking on psychedelics right now. So
Psychedelics.
We're going to stick with this, and we're going to wait to see what questions are asked. Phil, I want to go to you because what Jeff was just talking about, what has been done in advance of these negotiations. This administration that kind of likes to muscle its way through some of these tough talks. And look, I'll be honest with you, as someone who's covered diplomacy, sometimes that's useful. Sometimes people are a little too rigid about format and working groups, and sometimes that's helpful. But I was talking with a couple of State Department sources this morning who told me, to their knowledge, no one from the State Department is scheduled to travel there. You're on the ground. Have you seen any advance work, any pre-delegates showing up from the U.S.? To Michelle's point, is there energy on the ground? Are people talking in preparations for these talks, or are they just not there yet?
Look, in terms of visitors, any diplomats or any high-ranking officials, nothing to report at this point. Essentially, both countries, both governments, Iran and the United States, anyone who would take part in these talks, they've been told to be ready to travel, essentially, at a moment's notice. Islamabad is getting ready for this, that much is for sure. Any of us who've covered big summits know that this is a city that is getting ready for further high-profile visits. It is pretty obvious with events being cancelled, with everything being prepared, roads closed. That much is pretty obvious. You have to be ready just in case. It all depends, of course, as well, what kind of security preparations you need. Depends on how high the visitors might be. Will the Vice President be here again? And as Jeff just mentioned, the President himself did at least float that idea somewhat, that he would be willing to come to Islamabad if there was something to sign. We all know that he loves to sign an agreement, some kind of a peace agreement. If there is one to sign, he wants to be the one who signs it, not someone like Steve Witkoff or J.D. Vance. In that case, I think you can expect him to be traveling here despite a security situation that hasn't led to many U.S. presidents, after all, visiting Pakistan over the last few decades. But there has been speculation here for the whole week, despite the fact that the talks at the weekend ended in what first was seen as a failure because there was nothing to sign, there was no agreement, there was nothing. But still afterwards, we did get the details that they did agree upon a lot more than someone like J.D. Vance was willing to admit in his short press appearance after those talks came to an end. So there is more agreement than you might be able to make out from the rhetoric, at least, when it comes to President Trump, or indeed Iran's president, its foreign minister, or indeed its parliament speaker. Some of that rhetoric, especially over the last 12 hours or so, has been particularly aggressive. That does not mean that the two sides can't come to the negotiating table, and Islamabad is certainly preparing for that eventuality.
Fair point.
Philip Crowther talking about the president's propensity for signing documents. He's in the Oval Office signing what we gather is an executive order that would accelerate access to research on psychedelic drugs. Michelle Hussein, I'll take advantage of you being here from London and ask you sort of what the mood or conversation is like among the British government, other European governments, about the Middle East. So there was an effort a couple of days ago to gather some allies of the U.S., strained as they are, to talk about sort of securing the Strait of Hormuz. What is the conversation like now, many weeks after that initial entreaty from the President of the United States, for these allies to get involved in patrolling and protecting it?
Well, I think there's clearly the willingness to be part of the solution once the solution looks like it's being agreed. And I think it's really worth remembering what is at stake economically globally, because I've been struck by being in the US in the last week how far away the war feels. And yet in the UK, even though it's not in the position of India and Pakistan, where so much energy is coming from the Gulf. However, a country like the UK's G7 economy remains a large energy importer. And I've seen, within about a week of this war breaking out, people who saw their mortgage deals being pulled from the market, the UK government realizing that with what growth forecasts are now looking like, the things that it hoped to do later in the year, and it's a government that's under a lot of pressure from voters to the left and to the right, a lot of those calculations are now being completely upended. So there's immense self-interest and a prize for getting involved to try and make any solution last. But equally, countries like the UK want to keep a distance from the actual theatre of hostility. So it's a really, really difficult dilemma. They want to work something out, but equally not wanting to be actually involved in this conflict.
Jeff Mason, I want to ask you, because we had some sound earlier from the president on Air Force One being asked about what we've been talking about, the different messaging from Iran and from the president himself. The president saying Iran has agreed on all this, and Iranian, it's a little unclear who exactly is in charge, but different ministers, officials saying that's not the case. And the president said something that flags a little interesting to me. He basically said, well, they've got their own people that they've got to, deal with. I've got my people. It was almost the equivalent of all politics are local. He didn't seem that worried about this. Do you think that is because, as we've been talking about, there have been behind the scenes communications? He's confident that something will go forward, or do you think it's just the president brushing off any potential criticism?
I think it's at least in part because he's just over it and wants to be done. And so he has shifted his language to talk in a more positive way. He has said things like, I trust the Iranians. He sees a reason to trust Iranians. That is exactly polar opposite of the language that he was using before this war began, during the war. And honestly, just the history between Iran and the United States and the international community for decades. So I don't know where that trust is coming from now, other than the fact that the president is absolutely eager for this to be over. That's not to say that they haven't agreed some things. And there are some hints as to what they have agreed. In fact, ironically, some of those things are somewhat similar to the agreement that was made under President Barack Obama's administration, which the president pulled out of during his first term. That will be a very interesting irony if any eventual agreement ends up looking similar to that. But for now, the details are sketchy. The details on whether talks are going to happen are sketchy. But what is not sketchy is that the president is pretty clearly moving in the direction of wanting to have peace, even if that doesn't mean all the details that he has laid out are fully accurate, or even if he doesn't achieve all of the goals that he and many conservative hawks around him would like to see achieved.
Jeff, we've got about 60 seconds left here. You've been listening to the president as he went to Nevada, to Arizona after that. How much is this eclipsing what he wants to be talking about, be that psychedelics today or the economy,
him, including Susie Wiles.
Yeah, or the economy as he was scheduled to speak about in Nevada.
A lot. It's a lot. And the reason for that, of course, is that the midterm elections are getting closer and closer every day. November seems like it's far off, but polls have his popularity, and as reflected in polls, have really been hurt by the high gasoline prices. And that is at the top of their minds. And they're wanting to change the subject and change the trajectory going into that very pivotal fall.
All right, Jeff Mason, our White House correspondent, Phil Crowther, who is in Islamabad, thank you so much for your help today, and Michelle Hussein, who's on set, which is such a treat, and we never get to see you, and we love having you on. Be sure to listen to the Michelle Hussein podcast, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you listen, and watch full episodes. Yes, they are on the TV and also on the Bloomberg Business app.
We're going to put up here another live picture from the Oval Office. President Trump signing that executive order related to psychedelics and psychedelic research. We are, of course, monitoring that for any comments or questions reporters might ask him about the Iran war.
In the meantime, new clues into who created Bitcoin. Whoever it is, it's one of the richest people in the world, but they haven't touched the money. A new documentary digs into who Satoshi might be. We're going to talk to the filmmakers next. That's straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. And we'll start with the latest in the war in Iran. Bloomberg says that ship owners in the Strait of Hormuz reported gunfire in the waterway, and also ships were abandoning efforts to transit the waterway. This is after a brief time when it appeared it might reopen. Iran's military says the strait is closed. Now, Iran's supreme leader is warning the Navy that it was ready to inflict, quote, new bitter defeats on the U.S. and Israel as tensions escalate. In other news this morning, the White House said a meeting Friday with Anthropic CEO was, quote, productive and constructive. Some of the topics discussed include opportunities for collaboration, concerns over the challenges from AI, the Trump administration looking to get wider access to the company's powerful new Mythos artificial intelligence model. And American Airlines said it is not in talks or interested in a merger with United Airlines. In a statement, the carrier said a combination, it would be negative for the competition and for consumers. United CEO also had floated that idea of the merger directly to President Donald Trump in February, but looks like that may not happen. Christina and David.
Thank you very much. Well, it is one of the biggest mysteries of a generation. Who invented Bitcoin? Whoever it is, they're one of the richest people or persons in the world.
And they've been hiding behind the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto for nearly 2 decades. The filmmakers behind Finding Satoshi investigate new leads to figure out who it might be. We've got a clip.
This is the greatest financial mystery of the 21st century.
Bitcoin is one of the most groundbreaking financial innovations in decades.
The inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, completely disappears.
I liken Satoshi to Prometheus. It's like giving the world fire
Satoshi is one of the wealthiest people in the world.
He owns
1.1 million Bitcoin, but none of them have ever been moved.
Satoshi is worth billions of dollars. I'm Bill Cohan. I'm a best-selling author. I've always been interested in film and documentaries.
I'm Tyler Maroney. I'm investigating murder, bank fraud, embezzlement. The mindset has to be, how do I find new ways to find that information? It's not human nature to not touch
a massive fortune.
Is there anyone else who worked with you?
I'd rather not go into that. Yeah, I'm not going on camera to talk about that.
You don't want to answer who?
Doesn't matter. I don't play the speculation game of who's Nakamoto.
I feel like that needs a dun, dun, dun.
Yes, sure.
And just a reminder, when Bitcoin was introduced in 2008, it was worth fractions of a penny, and here's where it is now, worth $76,000 a coin.
Well, two of the filmmakers are joining us here in studio. Investigative journalist, founding partner at Puck, Bill Cohan, back with us, along with private investigator and co-founder of Question Research and Investigations, Tyler Maroney. Great to have both of you with us. We're not going to reveal who you identify Satoshi Nakamoto as. But what I will do here is you have a list of suspects.
But that's asking a lot of self-control over journalists.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not gonna do it.
Continue. I will adult.
Very recently, the New York Times reporter John Kerry was out with a piece suggesting that Adam Back is Satoshi Nakamoto. I will say that's not who you identify Satoshi Nakamoto as. Walk us through why he is not. You pick who wants to do it.
You start, Tyler.
Well, I think I'm going to answer that a question differently.
Okay.
I mean, our film involved interviews with dozens of people. We interviewed hundreds.
All over the world.
All over the world. And that's one of the kind of methodologies that we used that was not used by the New York Times. I don't think there's any sources that are quoted. His excellent investigation involved a lot of data analysis. We also did that. So our conclusions and our methodology are very different, and I'm looking very much forward to how people compare the two.
How did you two get connected? How long have you known each other, and why did you want to do this?
Well, I didn't say to myself, Bill, you're an investigative journalist. You know, who's Satoshi Nakamoto? I've got to write a film, do a film about this. You know, I was kind of minding my own business, working on another book, and you know, I got a call from the producer and the director saying, would I be interested in sort of being the David Gura of the process, you know, where I, you know, interview all these, you know, sort of OG crypto people.
Gary Gensler.
Michael Saylor, you know.
But was this your world? How much of this did you know? Okay.
No. I was like everybody else. Like, what is Bitcoin? You know, I'm kind of interested in that. I mean, it seems like it's a new form of digital gold or digital currency, but anytime somebody talked about the blockchain or the ledger like everybody else, my eyes would glaze over and like, okay, what are these people talking about? So I thought, all right, I'm a financial journalist, I'm an investigative reporter, I should know what this is. And this was an opportunity to actually dig in and try to figure out what this was all about.
So you're sitting down with tech journalists and regulators, Kara Swisher, Nick Bilton, and the likes, and you keep hitting this wall. And that's when you bring in Tyler. Explain sort of what you proposed or what was appealing to you about this project.
Well, what fascinated me first was how many people had tried to solve it. I mean, journalists from the top media organizations in the world, internet sleuths, academics for, 10, 15 years, people have been digging and digging and digging. And it was kind of shocking that no one had it. And what we had a realization, which is that the persona of Satoshi was just as fascinating to us as the creation of Bitcoin.
The cult of, not even personality,
the cult of this, exactly. Who was this person and what was his or her motives and where did they come from and why did they create this? And so while Bill was interviewing people who were using it, I liken it to, imagine we're making a film about F1. Bill is interviewing the drivers of the cars and I'm interviewing the people who design the cars, the engineers. And so I was able to go back in history and talk to cryptographers. So these are computer scientists who specialize in creating digital systems to allow us to protect our privacy. To create security.
It's a fascinating community.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I went back and I met people who were studying this and part of this community going back to the 1970s and how the idea that we need some kind of protection using computer systems against an encroaching surveillance capitalism. And this is how they thought of this going all the way back a generation or two.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is in many ways the kind of culmination of that thinking.
That's what was interesting to me. I didn't know that. There's great graphics in this film, but you show kind of like the predecessors of it. There's like a bit gold and a something else, and like the predecessors of the blockchain technology, which is what makes it such a durable product.
I think that's right. And what Satoshi did so well was he took all of these, and these aren't necessarily predecessors as much as they were pieces in the building that he was going to build. So he took all these other technologies that had related but incomplete components and assembled them. And that was part of the brilliance technologically.
And we were really spurred on by the fact that I did all these interviews, like 25 or 30, and I kept getting the Heisman. People kept, blocking me.
Your
saying,
irritation was palpable, Bill.
Why are you interested in this, Bill? You're a smart guy. You should move on. This is not important. It doesn't matter who Satoshi is or was. We've got, as Michael Saylor says, Prometheus gave us the fire. Let's run with it. And so I think we have to get beyond this. We're not getting anywhere. I'm having these great interviews with Michael Saylor, who's mesmerizing, and Sam Bankman-Fried, who's mesmerizing, but that's when we had to turn to Tyler and say, okay, we need a private investigator, get beyond this and really get to the answer.
Tyler, there's this moment at the beginning of the film, it's like the movie Sneakers, if I may, where you're introducing who's on your team and who can do what. Talk a bit about that. Yes, you're a private investigator, but what resources were you able to bring to bear, not just you, but this team of experts that you work with?
It's a great question. So Satoshi lived mostly online. In fact, 100% online, right? Like what we know about the creator of Bitcoin comes from emails, internet posts, the white paper.
Yeah.
Like there's no TV appearances, right? There's no CEO. There's no corporate entity. There's no. It's just
no
almost fictional. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we had to spend a lot of time going through, data that was not only easy to find, but data that was very difficult to find. So we have a cyber investigations practice, which basically means we're able to find information that other people don't want us to find. So looking into corners of the web that are difficult to investigate and finding information and then making sense of that through pattern recognition and the like was a huge part of it.
You also talked to, as you mentioned, a lot of really famous people, but you talked to a lot of people I at least really had never heard of, and some of them made the more convincing arguments or seemed to provide some of the bigger pieces. Who did you find the most convincing or compelling?
Well, so the cryptographers we interviewed, in other words, computer scientists who make these privacy systems, were startlingly open to talking to us. I mean, very intellectually curious. I don't know, because I assumed that we'd get the same answer that Bill got, which is a lot of slam.
Of course, well, we know that. Most people
and he's proving it right now on television. But that openness to address the question, like, where did Bitcoin come from? Why do we have it? What kind of person would be interested in this? Was wonderful to talk to people, and many of the conversations we had in the film were the result of years of developing relationships with people and a kind of classic journalistic effort of developing rapport with people.
I think to some extent they really hadn't been asked before. Michael Saylor's,
filling up the boat
everywhere, right? And backing up the truck, and everybody's talking to him about Bitcoin. But the people you talk to, the people around, the cyberpunk era, they probably hadn't been interviewed as much and had a lot of memories, and they wanted to talk about it, I think.
You're asking about this, Bill, and Tyler, going back to the kind of cult of who this person is. Someone tells you this could be dangerous. If this person or these persons are unmasked, it could be dangerous. Explain that. What was that individual conveying to you about how things would change if the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto were to be public knowledge?
I've thought about this a lot. I mean, obviously there was the whole swatting incident, and there have been swatting incidents which are very scary. But I had a feeling after so many of these OG types, the people who had big investors or Wall Street types who were pursuing Bitcoin as an asset class, I don't think they wanted us to figure out who Satoshi was, because what if Satoshi was like a bad guy or somebody we didn't like or did things that weren't great? Then their whole, like Michael Saylor has what, $50 billion invested in Bitcoin?
On a given day.
On a given day. And it goes up, it goes down. And if Satoshi turned out to be some sort of nefarious character, then maybe the value of that Bitcoin investment would deteriorate dramatically. And, so we got a lot of pushback on that. And, why do you need to know? It doesn't matter.
That's my question. Why does it matter? Why did you guys want to put all this?
Because it's one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th and 21st century. In financial mysteries. It's an incredible development. It's an incredible innovation. There's not that much innovation on Wall Street, generally speaking, and to create, a digital currency that, you can use for all sorts of interesting things. And who did it? And the white paper shows up. It's not a mystery. It's not a coincidence that the white paper shows up in the middle of the financial crisis, right?
Yeah, I understand when this product was developed, wanting to keep it secret because, there could have been law enforcement action or whatever. But at this point, why wouldn't these people come forward or this person come forward? Do we know why?
Well,
I don't want to reveal anything, but obviously,
I think we do know now.
Okay.
And when you watch the film, you'll see.
All right, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Please watch.
Tyler, very quickly, there's Gillian and Ted at the end of this film talking about what Bill was just mentioning a moment ago, which is, we can make fun of crypto as being pet rocks or whatever, but it was born, as you're saying, out of this movement that wanted to really reinvent things.
I'm glad you asked that question because one of our insights in the film, which is well known in the community, is that if we think of Bitcoin today, we think of it as a big global asset. It was not born that way. And in many ways, it was created by people who saw that there were issues in society that they wanted to fix. So they were essentially mathematicians who were activists, who saw the world in a very different way and proposed a solution to the problems that they saw. And I think that's a fascinating history project.
Tyler Maroney, Bill Cohan, thank you both. When's the film out? This week?
22nd.
Yeah. Come back and talk more about it. It's fascinating. It's a great movie. Thank you both very much for joining us here in New York. We're going to get a check of the headlines now with our friend and colleague, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And let's get right to it now. Venezuela's main opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, said she's coordinating her return to the country with the U.S. Now, she was speaking at a press conference in Madrid today. She said she's, quote, in permanent contact with officials in the Trump administration and trusts the phased process Washington is pushing in her home country. She did not, though, give a date as to when she plans to return. In other news, the Wall Street Journal reporting the Justice Department is close to filing an antitrust lawsuit against major egg producers, including Cal-Maine Foods. That's all over price fixing. It's the latest in a string of similar lawsuits against the U.S. egg producers. The cost of eggs, well, it's been skyrocketing recent years because of the supply shortages linked to the bird flu outbreaks. In February, wholesale egg prices soared about 94% after pledging nearly 64% in January. And more layoffs coming to Meta. Reuters says that the parent company of Instagram, Facebook, they plan to cut 10% of its workforce, or about 8,000 jobs next month, with more layoffs even planned for later this year. Meta, they've been shrinking its payrolls and it tries to offset that massive $600 billion spend on AI infrastructure. Christina and David, back to you.
Lisa, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. We're going to go back to Washington, where the president is in the Oval Office signing a piece of legislation about psychedelics, but we believe he might be answering questions on Iran or speaking there shortly. So we're keeping an eye on this as we go about a very busy breaking news day, which we seem to have a lot of here on Bloomberg this weekend.
So the president signed this executive order, effectively allowing more research into psychedelic medications. He has RFK Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, alongside him. I believe Joe Rogan is present in the Oval Office on this Saturday morning as well. Rick Perry, the former Energy Secretary, I believe, in the Oval Office as well. It's the president's making remarks about these advancements, but what we're waiting for here, of course, are any comments that he can give on the state of the conflict in the Middle East. And Christina, as we've been talking about over the course of the morning, so much confusion has manifested itself between what Iran's foreign minister has said, what the president has said about the state of play in the Strait of Hormuz. Is it open? Is it not? How safe is it for transit by ships in that waterway?
And what is actually happening, because despite the rhetoric, and we did hear at one point from both sides saying the strait was open. We spoke earlier just last hour with Arsenio Dominguez, who's the Secretary General of the Maritime Organization at the UN. We've been talking for weeks to him about these 20,000 sailors who are essentially stuck there, and he said that that number has not really changed to a large amount, which means that either the strait wasn't open or these shipping companies did not have the confidence or in the safety of their crews and vessels to take that risk at that time.
And he talking just about the difficulty of getting a real sense of what's happening in the strait right now. Of course, he, the Secretary General of this International Maritime Organization, so focused on those seafarers who've been effectively stuck on those vessels since the beginning of this conflict. We were reporting earlier this morning about the potential shots fired by the Iranian guard on some of those ships. He's saying from his vantage in London, very difficult to get an understanding of what's happening there. And again, encapsulating this kind of overarching level of confusion that seems to be permeating this entire situation.
That's right. We're going to step away for a second. It looks like the president is staying focused on the topic du jour, but we will come back to you if they do speak about Iran.
In the meantime, we're going to sit down here, play a conversation rather, that took place between Christina and the CEO of JLL. Let's take a listen to that.
It's Saturday, and you know what that means. It is time for C-Suite Saturdays. As we talk about this uncertainty across the globe right now and the influx of AI and how that's changing business, we wanted to reach out to someone who runs a very large business that can be impacted by all of these factors about how they are navigating this and looking to success for the future. We want to talk to Christian Ulbrich. He's the president and global CEO of JLL. Now, this is a 243-year-old company. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
You have offices in 80 countries, over 100,000 employees, and you have been CEO since 2016.
That's true.
It's not been a very calm decade. How has that time passed? I mean, you guys mostly deal with real estate, and what comes to mind obviously first is COVID and the office drain. But I was looking at some numbers that were saying that's kind of rebounded, especially for premium corporate real estate in cities like New York. So tell us how it's going.
Well, it's going really well for us. And with regards to the tenure you're talking about, I had time to get used to all the global disruptions, which is hitting us.
What was harder? I mean, what have the hardest bits been for you? Was it COVID? Was it the current global uncertainty? What were the things that stand out as moments where you really had to reevaluate not only your business, but your leadership style?
It was clearly COVID, when we were all forced to stay home, and to run the company out of your home office was an interesting experience. And at the beginning, we thought that would be over within a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But then it was taking very long. And you know, we have a lot of shared service centers, and we do payments on behalf of our clients. So when that happened, that we all had to stay home, I was thinking about all my colleagues in India who have to go home and then execute payments in the amounts of billions every day on behalf of our clients. And I was a bit nervous, but it went well. But we learned a lot from that experience.
What did you learn?
Well, you know, having resilience in an organization, having the trust of the people, and confidence in the organization is very important. And I think you have to understand that the world has become so complex that you cannot run it on your own, a company like this. So you have to rely on a super strong team, and you have to let go.
Is that hard? I mean, I'm a bit of a control freak. Is it hard sometimes to let go, or is that something you're getting better at?
I think I really learned that. I was quite young when I got into my first leadership position, and at the time I was more than like you, a control freak. But when the organizations grew bigger, I had to learn that you have to let go and that you have to surround yourself with an excellent team. And so I think I was quite prepared for that. But still, staying home was hard.
I want to ask you about how things are doing. We've got some numbers. National leasing demand has recovered within 85% of pre-pandemic levels, and that's driven by demand for high-quality premier office space. How do you define that, and what are the places where you're seeing this real estate rebound and commercial real estate do really well?
Well, you can see the best buildings in every city, because that is a global story, are doing extremely well. Okay. We are going from record rent levels to record rent levels for the best buildings here in New York, but everywhere. And so that is even better than pre-2019, or 2019 was the record year. Why it's only 85%, it's that the what we would call the B locations, B buildings, are still not there where they were in 2019, but the best buildings are far ahead of the levels of 2019.
Why do you think that is? Is it because so many people, I mean, including our neighbor JP Morgan, Bloomberg isn't back to office, people are being told go back to work, and in order to get people back to work, they need nice offices? Or is it just what corporations want?
Well, you know, somebody introduced that theme of the K-shape economy.
Yes, we talk about that a lot here at Bloomberg.
Yeah, but you can use that word K for almost everything now, because you have a situation that the best companies are clearly outperforming their competitors.
Yeah.
And the best companies have the ambition to provide the best possible space for their colleagues. And so there's almost a race to bring the people into the best buildings. I mean, the Bloomberg building was setting an example when it was created.
It's a very nice building.
It's a very nice building. But, you know, every new very nice building, there's almost a race for companies who want to get into that building. And this is what is really interesting. This is everywhere. It is in Sydney, it's in the US, it's in Europe. You can go wherever you want to go. It's the same story.
I want to ask how AI is disrupting or enhancing what you do. How have you seen it? When did you really start to see it make a difference, either good or bad, in your business? And how are you using it? And is it helping?
Yeah, I mean, I have been literally paranoid about that topic for many, many years, and you have to, because if it is a threat to your organization, then you have to be on top of it very early on. For now, it is clearly a tailwind for us because we are very people-intensive organization, and it drives efficiency into our platform. That means we can grow revenues very significantly without adding a lot of new headcount.
Okay.
Now, we're also watching, could that be something which is a risk to us? And the risk could be on two sides. It could be that overall jobs are being lost, and therefore there's less space for us to take care of going forward because our clients have less space needs.
Oh,
so that is for us the bigger topic.
Because every job cut is a desk you don't need anymore.
Potentially, yes. And then it could also be, is there anything coming which would potentially disintermediate us in some of our services? For now, we see nothing on either of those two. So I have to say for now, it's clearly a tailwind. But we're obviously very much on the front foot to see whether that may change. And at some point, there are also a couple of headwinds coming to us.
Have you gotten any pushback internally from within the organization? Is there any place you've tried to implement AI where your employees or leadership has said this really doesn't work?
I wouldn't say that we had pushback, but the pushback would be actually almost positive, because then you know who is kind of undermining your effort. What is much more dangerous are those people who are nodding and saying that's a great idea, and then they return back to their desk and then they do whatever they can that it is not happening. So I like people to be upfront saying they don't like it. But so far, I would say people are fascinated because it becomes now, through all these kind of Claude, ChatGPTs, it becomes now a citizen thing.
Yeah.
And so they are playing around with those tools for themselves in their leisure time, and they are fascinating what it can do, and they want to have it in their professional life as well. So for the time being, I think the majority of people are fascinated by it. Now, they're also concerned, but frankly, within JLL, the advantage they have that we are a fast-growing organization, and even if we drive efficiency, that doesn't necessarily mean that jobs will be lost within our organization. They may change, but they may not be lost.
I also want to ask you about your climate initiative. Yeah. I heard this is something you're passionate about and want to talk about.
Yeah, people always think that this is something really special. I would say it's just common sense. Okay. We need to save energy because it makes sense from a business perspective. And the proof of the last couple of weeks is, again, that when energy prices are going up, that's a cost factor for many organizations. And so we try so hard to reduce cost and be super efficient everywhere. It makes a lot of sense to be it also on the energy side. And then you have a double win. You're saving money and you are less polluting the world. And then we can debate what impact that pollution has, but clearly it has an impact. And if we can reduce that impact, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Christian, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Christian Ulbrich of ULL there, talking with Christina a couple of weeks back for our C-Suite Saturdays segment. Fascinating conversation with him.
It was interesting, the similarities between talking to the CEO of Train. They're both making arguments for green technology, but for bottom line purposes, because energy is expensive and it's beneficial to these companies.
We're going to go back to the White House now. The President of the United States in the Oval Office fielding questions from reporters. Let's take a listen to what he's being asked and what he has to say.
For years, and they can't blackmail us. In fact, a lot of the ships are coming up to Texas. I don't know if you know, in Louisiana, the ships are coming up. They got used to it. Maybe they'll keep doing it. It's worked out pretty good. But it's going actually along very well. And we'll see, but we'll have some information by the end of the day. We're talking to them. And, we're taking a tough stand. They've killed a lot of people. A lot of our people have been killed. A lot of your fellow soldiers have been killed over the years by Iran. The roadside bomb. Soleimani, I killed Soleimani.
He was making the explosive form penetrators. They were making them in Iran, bringing them to Iraq and blasting through the vehicles.
Well, he was the father of the roadside bomb, essentially, and he killed a lot of people. And when you see soldiers or others, but soldiers generally walking around with no legs, with no arms, a face that's been smashed, that was Soleimani, that was Iran that did that. So we have a much different view on it than other presidents. They've gotten away with murder for 47 years. They're not getting away with it anymore. Does anybody have any questions with the great professionals, please?
So I wanted to know, could this potentially ever be available through the VA? You know, because I was talking to Liz over here, you guys went down to Mexico together, but it's really expensive. And this is another drug that's expensive.
We have the right guy, Oz.
A
Let's
lot
go.
of veterans need this.
Why are you good for this question? They're talking about expense and availability.
So I spoke to Doug Collins. Obviously, both he obviously pays for the VA, and we pay for Medicare, Medicaid, children's health insurance. Are very focused on the results that the NIH and FDA are going to offer us. We have a mechanism of creating models, CMMI. That might be the wise way to go because we can continue to study the impact. It is such a massive shift in how you deliver care. Imagine instead of taking a pill a day for your depression, you go through one treatment, but you have to have few people watching you. It's a very different world. So we're working that through. That's why the president, who I think this is the perfect step to get everything rolling, to deliver on the promise he made.
What's timing would you say on that, before you know?
We could have a CMMI model that we would announce by the end of this year. But the reason I'm not committing to that now is I want to make sure that the FDA and NIH have time, along with the great scientists, to give us a bit more information about how to deliver care. I'll give you one concrete example. For things like, well, Ibogaine is a little different story, but you would want 2 people in the room during the treatment. That's true for many of these approaches. That's a very different way of delivering medicine. And so the models that Abe Sutton runs that group for us and has done a great job for the president, that would be probably the fastest way of moving forward and give the VA data so they can make wiser decisions, because Doug Collins is very focused on this.
There's one thing I'd add. There's nothing more expensive right now than the mental health crisis in America. 21% of Americans have a diagnosable mental health condition. The second leading cause of death for young adults today is suicide. Mr. President, antidepressants right now are the most prescribed class of medications in the country. Over 20% of women are on an antidepressant.
And is that good in terms of do they work?
There's highly problematic research on the fact that over 20% of U.S. women are on these drugs that are prescribed for life. We have a mental health crisis. And
do they work?
No. They don't. I'm on a couple of them, and
I would not have. I would not
I'm talking to Liz. I said, I think I'd be next, but no, it is definitely an issue for women.
But, Mr. President, what you and Secretary Kennedy unlocked is for the first time questioning this system, where we spend 3 times more per capita than any other country in the world, and we are living 6-7 years less. We have the highest rates of suicide and depression in the developed world. The incentives of our system.
And by the way, autism, which we're really working hard on, right, Bob?
We have the highest rates.
And we're coming up with some pretty amazing findings.
Pediatric cancer is the highest rates in the world. We are struggling and paying more than any other country, and the power of this executive order is really representative and gives validation to the cries of Maha moms and the votes of Maha moms, because for the first time it's taking a therapy that's one time. This is a one time, not a lifetime drug that can change someone's life, and that's the power. And I think that's why the system.
So the antidepressants, all that we read about and we prescribe to our military, they're not very effective.
It's a lifetime drug, and
well, even if it's lifetime, but do they?
Look at what's happened as we've prescribed them and made them one of the most prescribed.
Well, the numbers are not great.
Perhaps I could jump in from the scientific side.
Thank you, Mr. President. What's the timeline for those
she just wanted to say something.
I think what's really important about your order is you include, we really want to understand why these rapid-acting treatments work. We need that for every treatment in mental health illnesses. Standard antidepressants in research, they do work for some people, but certainly not everyone. And if we think of cancer, all other conditions, we have a test to know which treatment is needed, and we don't have that for mental illness. It's guesswork.
This is tough. With that, it either works or it doesn't work, and you have the result. With this, you don't know.
As part of this order, I think it's really important that we're able to have the investment to understand who does this work for, and the test to accompany that. So thank you for making that.
Do you think this can be a big step above antidepressants? what we're doing?
I think it can be identifying who doesn't respond to an antidepressant straight away, rather than waiting for years. And
What
being
percentage
able
of people respond positively to antidepressants? How
20
much?
to 30%.
That's not great.
No.
That's not great. Well, thank you very much. Good question.
Mr. President, what's the timeline for those with mental health disorders, substance abuse disorders, to readily take advantage of this treatment based upon the executive order that you're signing today?
So I'd like to ask maybe Marty that question.
Sure. So first of all, right now it's available on clinical trials. We have not had applications in-house at the FDA. There was one that came in under the Biden administration. It was kicked out and not accepted. We now have 3 applications that are imminent, and we'll be issuing vouchers next week. The fastest FDA approval was 42 days during the HIV epidemic. On our national priority voucher program under President Trump, we are now down to that time frame on a routine basis instead of a year. In my opinion, we need the same level of urgency we had with HIV for PTSD and depression and anxiety and our mental health disorder and cancer and heart disease and so many other conditions. So you're going to see decisions out from the FDA later this summer as soon as we get the applications.
That's great. That's great.
And Mr. President,
I like that answer. I really like that answer.
Thank you, Mr. President. And then in regards to the timing of the executive order, was there not enough known about this treatment a year ago or 5 years ago or 8 years ago to sign the executive order that you signed?
So do you want to answer that question? Go ahead.
I just add in 2016, the lead professor at Johns Hopkins said this was the most promising therapy that he's seen in his career, and many doctors from leading institutions said that. There's been a hold, there's been incentives against this, and it's the bravery and leadership of President Trump that's getting this in.
Artificial barriers?
It started, and this, to be clear, is starting a fast-track scientific process that's subject to FDA approval. But this has been known among leading institutions for many times as a very promising therapy.
So could it not have been signed in your first term, or there just wasn't enough information known about it?
Nobody told me about it, frankly. I mean, I got, all of a sudden, I've been getting a lot of calls. I think a lot, in all fairness, I think a lot's been learned over the last few years.
I should say that. I mean, a lot has been learned over the past few years. I think in the first term, if I was standing behind the president, I would have much more comfortable than I am now, thanks to the research that's been done. I mean, it's still a lot more to do. It's worked for so many people, and that's really a great move to do this. But the research is really important because we're going to keep improving, keep learning, and make sure that the people get the treatment they need when they are depressed, when they are addicted, when they have PTSD. That's if you keep doing the research and also acknowledge the research that's been done. That's when you get good health policy.
And Secretary Kennedy's role, he just doesn't stop. I mean, every day, all day long, until he gets these things done. This is not an easy boulder to push up the hill. And Secretary Kennedy was undaunted, and he'd been talking about it for a while, so he had a passion anyway. But his mentoring that's allowed a lot of folks to move this quickly.
And if I can jump in rapidly, because I was one of those doctors that was not supportive of psychedelic therapy because I thought it was magical thinking. But over the past 6 to 10 years, we have seen an emergence of data that we cannot ignore. These drugs have the capacity, as was mentioned before, with one single administration to change the behavior of someone towards a therapeutic effect. In animal models, one single administration recreates pathways that have been eroded because of pathology. So we have a tool that potentially could allow us to basically manipulate the ability of our own bodies to heal itself, if we know how to properly use it. And that's why research, as I mentioned before, is opening up doors to explore what else can we do, how to optimally use it.
But you're just hearing and seeing automatic research. You're hearing and seeing things now that you wouldn't have really, you wouldn't be able to have done a couple of years ago. I mean, it just seems to me, I've been hearing about it a little bit over the last year. I never heard anything about it in the past. It was almost like taboo. It's not taboo anymore, right?
And there was not enough science neither. And I think that's where the evidence speaks for itself. And ultimately, that's why I say I was one of those doctors that didn't believe in it. So we do data in order to change our perspective and to do things better.
I was surprised to hear about the antidepressants. I assumed they'd be better. That's not very good. So, Bobby, you're going to push it very hard?
Yes.
We'll get it done? Sounds good to me. Well, these two guys and this third with Rob, too, and with you, I mean, that to me is research, right? Maybe the ultimate research, right? Big fans, all big fans. Right? Well, I want to thank everybody, and
Mr. President,
it's going to be... Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
And they clap so you can hear the question. All right, we've been listening to President Trump speaking in the Oval Office. He was at an event signing research funding for psychedelics, and one reporter managed to get, I think, one question about Iran. The rest of them were on topic. And the thing that stood out to me is the president said he is talking to them, and they are having, progress in that area. Not a lot of details, not any details about whether or not talks will be happening on Monday, who will be going to those talks, or any kind of direct response to the strait being closed again yet this morning.
Yeah, the president there, behind him, his Health and Human Services Secretary, other members of the team. Joe Rogan was there as well, talking about, again, advancements in psychoactive drugs. Of course, the conversation we've been having this morning centers on what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Is it open or not? We were hoping to get some more insight there from the president into whether or not that's the case. We did not, but that will definitely be animating conversations throughout the day and tomorrow. We're back here on Sunday morning.
Of course. We also have been looking at whether or not traffic through the strait is safe and whether or not those trapped sailors are able to get out, in addition to the role of geopolitics, how Europe is feeling about this conflict, how Pakistan is mediating it, and whether all these parties can come together at any kind of timeline. But a lot to unpack tomorrow. We'll be here.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us on Bloomberg This Week. And tomorrow on the program, Indiana Republican Congressman Marlon Stutzman, acclaimed chef and author Andrew Zimmern with an important message ahead of Earth Day. Hope you'll join us tomorrow morning starting at 7 a.m. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini, along with Lisa Mateo. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, Masters in Business is up next.